Hello and welcome to the Spiralinghigher podcast, hosted by me, Sam, mindset and manifestation coach.
And me, Gina, your biz and mindset coach. We're here to support you on your spiritual journey by bringing you intimate and raw conversations about healing, manifestation, consciousness, and spirituality.
We hope this podcast makes you feel less alone as you become aware of your patterns and limiting beliefs to up-level your life, manifest like a boss, and together, spiral higher. Hello and welcome back to the Spiralinghigher podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Sam, and I'm here with Gina and a very special guest today. He is one of my favorite, all-time favorite creators on Instagram, TikTok, and I love his podcast, Universe the Game. He's also the author of The 10 Secrets of Awakening. Today we have Mr. Nick Zei. Welcome to the Spiralinghigher pod.
Let's go!
Woo! We are so ready to dive in. You are, Nick, as you know, I told you this when we first chatted, but you were someone that I was following and learning and integrating lessons from for almost a year before we connected. I just remember seeing those nature walks of you where you would just drop bombs and I'd be like,
I gotta do more of this.
Yes!
Recently, damn.
All of your nature videos were so fire. And I was like, this guy just goes on hikes and knows things. Like he just...
Facts.
Literal
That was
facts.
my life. I'm in the desert now, so it's like I could do it again, but it'd be just desert. Maybe it'd be good switching, but I miss those videos. You're right.
Yeah, well, tell us a little bit about the past couple years for you, because I know that when we first got to know each other, you were telling me about how you were originally living, I think you were living in Tennessee, which by the way is where I'm from, which was one of the first things that had connected us. But you were like washing cars at one point. You know, how did you go from that to being this total spiritual mind master of the universe? Because I've been reading 10 Secrets of Awakening, your book, and I swear every other page I just highlight, circle, star, bracket, annotate. And how did someone like you come to know all of this? What happened?
Well, you know, let's take it in a different space, okay? I remember watching Marvel. I love Marvel movies. Let's just start off there.
Okay.
And I remember Cap used to say, I'm just a guy from Brooklyn. That's how I feel. I'm just a guy who just decided, hey, this is kind of cool. I really enjoy, like, this perspective has helped me in life. And so then I just started talking about it. And I've done so many things. I started 2015, my first YouTube channel, bodybuilding and fitness. And then I went and live streamed video games for a while and had some success in that area. And then I went and I started making videos and doing stuff. I mean, it started out in Michigan and I had to leave because it ended up being a sketchy situation. And I met Jessie, my girlfriend. We've been together for 2 years now. And
Beautiful.
We started living out of a rooftop tent for 9 months. I'll just keep it very short.
Oh,
Then we traveled the U.S., lived nomadically, just us in the tent in the Mazda. It was not a truck or a Jeep. It was a Mazda CX-5. And one-wheel drive, by the way. We figured that out early on because we got stuck a couple times in Sedona. I love Sedona, but don't go off-roading in a CX-5. So
In a Mazda.
Right. So basically, from there, we ran out of money. Just decided, we're going to ground ourselves. Let's just take care of business. And so then my brother lived in Tennessee. He had a detailing business. And I said, I'm going to do what I need to do. I know I'm meant to do this eventually. I don't care how long it takes. And I'm just going to pay the bills, make money online, and eventually get to the point where, I'm supported online to do that. And then release the book. People ate the book up. People loved the book. And then the book was able to allow me to kind of travel a bit and to have my own place and to do these things. And again, I'm not saying anything to me. I'm just like, I don't really know shit. I just want to preface this podcast. That's just how I live my life in uncertainty. I just that's me, because I've realized the more I've learned about what could be, the less I actually know for sure that it is a certain way. So that's something I just like to say at the beginning for you guys, I'm like, just exploring what could be and the evidence of things and trying to bring some relaxation and maybe okay, let's just take a step back, okay? A little bit, instead of like being so serious about it. And that can go for the spiritual community, that can go for business, mindset, all the people. So I don't even really consider myself spiritual. I just consider myself just a dude who's just contemplating the nature of reality.
You know what's so funny? I think the most spiritual people are the ones who say that they're not spiritual.
So true.
Fair enough.
If you're saying you're spiritual, you're still in the ego, right? And so I love this playfulness that you bring to it, and that, yeah, it's so true. The more that you know, the less sure you are that things, like you said, are a certain way. But I do want to ask you about this, because this is something that you've sort of posited in a lot of your content. I mean, your podcast name sort of is based on it, Universe the Game, right? And I think that one of the perspectives that you hold now, and maybe it's changed, I don't know, since we last chatted, but one of the strongest perspectives that you hold is that this universe is a simulation. We in a game. This body is an avatar, right? And so for people who, I think there's a lot of people who've heard that, but don't really know what people mean by that. They're like, am I actually in a computer? I don't think that's what people are saying, right? But people don't understand. Some people say that. And it could be. You know what? It could be. That's the thing. This conversation is just about like what could be and not necessarily what is, because we don't know, right? But I think that, like I said, one of your perspectives is that this is a game. We are all here playing the game of, I think you said in your book, I love how you said that we're all playing the game of unworthiness and unlovability. Like, that's not real though, right? We're sort of under this guise that that's real, and we're playing this game to get out of it, when the game is really just realizing that that's not even true, right? But for someone who is maybe like new to this spiritual space and some of these perspectives, like how would you explain to the lay person, right, that the universe is a game?
So I think a good place to start would just to ask someone who's wondering about this, have you heard Elon Musk say it? That we're in a simulation. Have you heard Neil deGrasse Tyson, these bigger figures in the larger community, global community? They say these things. And what does simulation mean? Because when I say simulation and I say game, they are kind of interchangeable, but the way that the general public understands simulation is different from the way that I'm saying it's a simulation. Because when people say, like, if you take a look back, it actually started with Nick Bostrom, who was I think he was a physicist. He was a philosopher as well, that basically came up with this concept. I think it was in the early 2000s. I could be scuffing that, but he basically said, hey, I think we're in a simulation. And then that got popularized. And a lot of what his material is, from my understanding, is actually based on AI simulations versus non-AI simulations. Because the fundamental difference between when I say it's a game versus other people like Elon Musk, they are taking the more perspective of either it's an AI generated simulation, which it could be, or we are AIs in ourselves. Now, when I take a look at that perspective, I'm more of, hey, I've seen all this evidence of these spiritual traditions and ancient traditions of the East, and I see this concept of a soul floating around, and I've studied many hypno-regression type people, Dolores Cannon, Dr. Michael Newton. I've studied Hinduism, Buddhism, and I've like kind of brought all these together, and I'm like, I have just this sense of it's more likely than not that there is a soul. So then the question becomes, is the soul something that is generated from within the universe or without the universe? And if it's generated within the universe, does that mean that it is an AI in itself? And so my perspective is actually that it's not. And that's where my fundamental state and kind of sentence of the universe being a game, and like you said, it's my podcast name, is it's more, instead of us being the type of, at least I can say this for my own awareness, because I don't know for everyone. You know, I contemplate on my podcast, are there NPCs? A lot. And so when we think about that, it's like, could other people be NPCs and be generated from within the universe and be AI? Yes, that is possible. But from my fundamental awareness, and this is kind of funny, because if you look at shows like Westworld, of course the AI doesn't want to think they're an AI. They want to think they're not. So that's another thing. You're starting to, oh God, existential crisis. But again, from my research from the Eastern traditions combined with hypno-regression, NDEs, it seems as though the soul is actually something that can't be created in the same way that an AI can be created. And that's my feeling. That's something that I felt into subjectively as well. And so the perspective that I'm more going for, and hopefully that wasn't too complex, but the perspective is more along the lines of, we are, I guess you could say, just because it's an easy term to understand, we are organic souls in a game that is artificial. Kind of like if I'm playing a video game in this reality, I'm not from the video game. I'm just kind of in it and playing it as a
Mm-hmm.
character. And so what I'm doing is taking like the Hermetic principles, the as above, so below principle, and I'm bringing that back a little bit and saying, hey, maybe as we play video games in our reality, we are playing a video game as this character.
I'm sure you've done it before, but have you ever played VR?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I think any person who's put on a set of VR goggles and then they put the things in their hands, right? When you look at your arms or hands or legs in the game, you're like, whoa, like,
Right.
right? It's kind of like, whoa, I can do things in here, like with my hands. And then like in a really elaborate VR video game, you can, grab things and pick up boxes and all this stuff. And when I had the psychedelic experience, I remember like I had my eyes closed for quite a long time. And then when I opened them, it literally felt exactly like that. Like I had these goggles on, and all of a sudden I was like, whoa. Like I just looked at my hands, and then I like stood up and I was like, oh my God, I can like you. And it seemed so clear to me in that moment that I was separate from the body. Like that there was some that I was almost like the animating energy behind the body or within the body, but the body was being animated through me, and that was so cool to me. And that's just like an awareness that slips out of my consciousness often. I think in daily life, I think a lot of us forget. We forget that we're in here in this body. We think we're just like floating heads. I think a lot of us live almost like a short distance even from our own body. We don't even think of ourselves as being in here. We're just kind of like, I don't know. We think of ourselves as literal floating heads, but that was crazy. Like having this realization that I animate this body, and I don't know, it seems so obvious in that moment and in many moments after that there's something that exists beyond this. And then, going back to how you said you love to study the work of Dolores Cannon. I actually did a level 3 quantum healing hypnosis therapy session with someone who'd been trained directly by Dolores Cannon. And she lives here about 45 minutes away. And her wait list, Gina, you're on the wait list now, right?
Yeah, I think it was 18 months.
Yeah, it's a super long wait list because she's one of the only, well, I don't know how many level 3 practitioners there are, but either way, they're probably sparsely spread out around the world. And this particular person lives close to us. So we've both been on the wait list. I was on the wait list for over a year. And then I did my session back in March. And oh my gosh, like that session for me just confirmed that I really do not know anything. Like anything that my mind tells me is just so limited and just cannot comprehend the scope of all that is.
Dolores Cannon has always been a wild card for me. I really am fascinated by her work, but I also know there's a level of like, I've had other people that have told me that they've done Dolores Cannon type stuff, and they were surprised at how ineffective it was, and they felt more along the lines of they were trying to make things up, and maybe they were less susceptible to being hypnotized. So maybe
That's
that
possible.
is it.
Yeah.
So I think Dolores Cannon is kind of a step in for a lot of people to many of these topics, and I think a lot of people can get lost in saying that is the ultimate truth as soon as they experience that. And I am one who just knows and has been around a lot of people who have talked about these things, and I'm just like, it could be. And I'm curious as to what that portal could be. I mean, was it like that's the thing you load into to get into the next part?
I have no idea. And I mean, it's like what you said too earlier about how like, oh, am I just making this stuff up? Because I remember coming back to consciousness and being like, did I make that up? And that's what I asked the practitioner. And she just asked me, why would you make that up? And I was like, I don't know. Like, and she was like, do you think you would have been able to make that up? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I just remember leaving and feeling so confused. And I was like, was that a waste of money? Like, did I just tap into, it's like, is it a waste of money? Did I tap into secrets of the universe? Like, does it even matter? And, sometimes I feel like by going this deep, I wonder if it's even helpful, because sometimes I'm trying to know more. And so I'm wondering for you, after all of this seeking that you've done and so many insights that have come through, like in what ways do you feel like it's helped or maybe even hurt your lived human experience?
So I just want to say first off, I think there's a difference between passenger experiences and driver experiences. I would say the driver experience is kind of like Dolores Cannon, and the passenger experience is kind of like the psychedelic experience because it's not something that you can make up because it's something that you're directly experiencing and you're not controlling that. I mean, anyone who's done those type of things knows that, hey, what's going on here? I don't really have any control. I've kind of just got to sit back for the ride, whatever one that might be. Basically, plants. I'm talking about specifically plants. I'm always a proponent of things that are natural.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I feel about that arena as well. So I think it's different when you have people that might go into the plant arena and say these things versus someone who goes into the hypnoregression. I've seen that. And so I just wanted to say that just as kind of like a conclusion to that thought. But what you asked the question, what was some things that, or how does it affect my daily life after all of the research? Right?
Yeah. Because sometimes I feel like sometimes you go too deep where I've had a lot of existential moments this year where I've wondered, is this even helping? There's a lot of spiritual tools and insights that have come through that have definitely helped me, obviously, in my life. But then sometimes going too deep, I swear, it's like, okay, maybe I just need to lighten up and just
oh
go.
Oh my God.
That's
my life.
I know.
That's my life
so
right
how
now.
do we deal with this, right? Because I
How
think
do
a
you
lot
deal
of
with it?
people who listen to your podcast are probably freaking out. They're listening to Robert Grant and they're like, oh my God, the Vitruvian Man, the math. Oh my God, is this a simulation? The degree of the Vitruvian Man matching the pyramid angle. Holy crap. It just goes on and on and on. And the more you think about it, sometimes it's almost a bit like it just overwhelms me. And I'm like, I don't know. This is too much. I think I just need to go have a beer.
Hey, I feel that. Yeah. I mean, this last year has been just an exploration of, with the many guests that have had on the podcast. And so I have a lot of thoughts on that. And to take it in one direction to start, I had a guest on recently. The podcast, wasn't incredibly popular, but it was a really hard-hitting one for me. And I think that's what you might have experienced sometimes too. It's like sometimes the ones that don't have the most glitter are the ones that really are beneficial. So I had on this guy named Flynn, and we actually started off the conversation with a really interesting thought. And it's something that I've been thinking about more is what is the value or utility that a certain perception gives you? And if it's something that is beneficial to you in terms of when we think about benefit, it's like benefit for what? Because then it can be benefit to manipulate people. It can be this, that. When I say benefit and value, I'm talking about it gives you the perspective of, hey, this is more harmonious with others. This is giving me more harmony within myself. I think harmony is a really good word that I've really started to use more because it's like just describing a feeling of connectedness. So when I take a look at certain ways of thinking, I'm thinking, how does this help me to connect to others, maybe to empathize or emphasize more with the beliefs of others. So I'm not in an echo chamber because that's not what I wanted my podcast to be. I didn't want it to be, hey, universe is a game. Everybody come tell me it's a game. That way everybody thinks it's a game. So I've been thinking about that a lot. And I just had another guest on that's a little bit different. So I think what I'm not trying to do is just have an echo chamber of my own beliefs, but I'm also not trying to be so ingrained in my beliefs that I can't change when I hear evidence that I feel like is convincing. And so I think the value, let's just talk about the value of universe, the game in my life. When I think of the concept of the universe being a game, and I've talked about this with other guests too, because some people think the opposite of me. And I think that's important. People think that when you think the universe is a game, oh, it's scary. Oh, it's not good. Oh, there's this level of pressure that they feel. And for me, it's actually a quite relaxing feeling to think, okay, well, this is just if I'm in a game, that means a game's going to end at some point. And that means that we might experience the sensation of pain. But in the end, I think there might be some sort of coordination and as to why things are happening. So if I can just take the perspective, hey, it's a game, then that means that we can relax a little bit because there's probably some sort of organizing principle. Just like you don't play a video game that's filled with chaos. Some people do, but there's some level of order that allows you to have a coherent story. Most games that we love are games, I feel like, that have a coherent story. Some good examples of that was Game of the Year, I think it was this year, Elden Ring. It's a game just basically based on your single player playing a story all the way through. Skyrim, massively popular. World of Warcraft, massively popular as well. And why are these games popular? You know, there's the battle royale games that are popular too. But I think this style of game is popular because we love stories. I think there's something that we all know within that there might even be a story that we are actually participating in that is our own story. And that's why I've also incorporated a lot of Joseph Campbell's work with The Hero's Journey and The Hero of a Thousand Faces, his books. Those have really impacted me as well to see, even if it is a hero's journey, that doesn't mean that I have to take the perspective of everything is serious.
Yeah, Sam and I have definitely been introducing a lot more lightness into our life and not taking things so seriously. We talked a lot about how we think about the universe looking down on us and kind of giggling when we're struggling so hard and thinking, oh, look at them thinking their life is falling apart, or look at them thinking that, you know, they don't know anything or that they do know everything. And I think that has helped us both to just approach life with a little bit more lightness. I love the concept of thinking of it as a game, because when you play a game, you don't really care when you die. You're like, oh, I'll just try again, right? It's not all or nothing. And I find that when you do get like that in a video game, then you're not having fun anymore, which is the exact opposite of the point of the game.
Yeah, that's facts. And I think past life regression can be helpful. Past life contemplation can be helpful for that concept. And sometimes it can be hurtful because some people will see when you have one life, they'll try harder. Some people will say when you have many lives, you'll try less in this life.
Right.
So it's interesting to think about the dichotomy of this perspective. But I'm with you on that. I find it more of a, if it's temporary, I'm going to do the best that I can. But I also understand that, hey, there's a lot I can't control in terms of I can control my intention and my action, but the rest and how that organizes, I'm not responsible for that.
Yeah.
So I think that's another concept that I've really started to embrace is the delegation of authority in the universe. And I'm not saying that the authority has to be within a god that is personified. I think that the universe is actually smart enough to have and intelligent enough to have a field that organizes things. Now, there can be a multifaceted way of looking at this. A lot of people will say there's a higher self that is kind of this personified version of you that's outside the game. That could exist. And I do think there's also, when we think about the universe being a game, I actually have found, the more I study this concept of manifestation and the evidence of it and how that works, I actually find that very similar to the way that an algorithm works on social media. So if we think of manifestation as an algorithm, that actually is pretty helpful because you realize that, if you just keep looking at the same things, you're going to get the same thing back. But if you consciously change your intention and then you consistently follow through with that, the algorithm is eventually going to change, and there's a buffer of time on that. So I think that's really helpful to kind of see that maybe there's a feedback mechanism of the algorithm that it determines a lot of what your life is. But also in my book, I argue that it's not just that determines it. It's also maybe predetermined experiences that you may have chose before you came here. And I'm not saying that it is absolutely the case. I'm saying that I don't think there's one system that controls everything. I think there's many systems at play that help us to experience an experience that I think can be enjoyable. You know?
Okay, so there's actually a section in your book where you're talking about the law of attraction, and I think there's a lot of fear that people have, like when it comes to whatever energy they're holding, and if they're going to attract a bad experience, and then sometimes something quote unquote negative or something that is being perceived as negative will happen, and these people will assume that that's because of me, like I attracted that. And then you went on to say that's not necessarily true. That just might be an experience that you need for your expansion or whatever. And so I'm kind of curious to know your perspective on whether you think things are random or not. I've talked to a few other people about this. There's some people who think nothing is random, and then people who are some things are just random. So what do you think about randomness? Are these experiences sometimes that we're seeing with our own physical eyes translating, are these random? What could be the pattern behind some of these things? And if we are responsible for attracting some experiences but not others, right? What's the differentiation between those?
When you say random, what is the definition of that by you? Just so I can understand what you mean specifically.
I guess anything random though is just something you don't know what the pattern is for.
Like there's no
there's no pattern.
Right.
There's no pattern.
Or it's not planned. It's just
okay.
There's nothing that can point to
like a specific reason for it happening.
I think I'm not of the perspective. Okay, Robert Grant, my favorite podcast. And I really respect. He says that there's nothing random. Nothing random.
He did say that.
And so my perspective, if you watch that podcast, I didn't really get to say. I love Robert Grant, but I didn't get to say very many of my perspectives in that one. But I see it as there actually can be a level of randomness, but it's very minimal. Like, for example, the randomness could be you decide you want to go somewhere, and the route you take to go there isn't going to have a determining factor in any sense of what happens. So if you go left, the left route or the right route on Google Maps, and then random things happen, but it's like you might get there a minute later. I think that thing is, you could say random things might happen upon that don't have a determining effect on your entire life or on major aspects. I think that leaving room for just kind of things to come in and kind of test us in a sense, or kind of just like throw us in this space of what's going to happen, I think that could definitely be a possibility. So I'm not saying that there's no randomness, but there could be a level in which, hey, it's not something that determines major outcomes in our life. But I do think that most things, because I'm not one for absolutes. I remember watching Star Wars and they said, only Sith deal in absolutes. And after that, I'm like, okay, I don't want to be absolute, because I get the concept of dealing in absolutes. So maybe there's a level of randomness, but I think it's pretty low. I would say most things have some sort of determining factor as to why it's happening based on past experiences. And I think a lot of that comes from my background in studying Eastern traditions because of karma. And, there's reasons for mostly everything that happens. So that's kind of, if you're wondering why I came to that, the study of karma really led me to that conclusion.
Yeah,
I'd love for you to share a little bit more about karma.
I was just going to add to that and saying my belief is definitely that there's nothing random. I don't think so, but I do agree with you, Nick, that maybe there are some little things that happen that don't make an impact on the outcome or the destination, and those are the things that maybe can be random. But I do think that, we think about the things that we've experienced in our life, and you can kind of go back and retrace those steps. And there's been so many circumstances in my life that I can see how the universe kept bringing me back to the same thing because I wasn't getting it the first 10 times, but it keeps on rerouting. Okay, she didn't get it. Let's bring her back over here. Let's try this experience. So I do believe that there is, bigger power at play that is guiding us to maybe where we need to go. And there might be some few random things on the way that we have agency over, and maybe we don't make the quote unquote right decision. But I do think that every time it'll just bring us back to where we need to end up getting to. That's what I think.
Yeah, I'm with you 99%.
Yeah.
I think there's not, like, what I'm saying? Like, for me, it's because then you can make the argument, is it random? Like, if you go to a restaurant and the lady drops your drink, is that random?
I don't think so. That kind of stuff, I really don't. I don't know. I feel like everything is, maybe that wasn't for you. Maybe that was for her and you were just a witness to that, So I just feel like there's so many layers, there's so many threads, there's so many dots being connected that it just feels divinely orchestrated.
I'm like that on most things on 99%.
Right.
Because it's like 1%. Could we not be in a game? Yeah, 1%.
Right.
That's my perspective.
I like that.
Yeah,
I like that.
And I really like how we talked about like the utility of a certain perspective and like how that's beneficial because, my partner actually, he's like totally not like down with the game theory. He's just like, no, we're just here.
What does he say? Tell me.
He just says that this is his one life. He's like, and I'm just going to make the best of it. And that really helps him.
Right.
Like he really feels like he's like applying himself every day to the best of his ability because this is his one
YOLO.
life. He's like, yeah. And he's like, you know what? I'm pretty happy with the odds I ended up with. Like I'm a privileged person. Like, and I pursue my dreams. I'm doing what I'm doing. He's like, and this is what I'm doing with my one life. And it's funny because I used to be like, that's so like, to me, it feels so narrow. I'm like, really? Out of like all the possibilities, like that's the one? Like,
let him be surprised.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know, but
yeah.
Or not. Maybe he's right.
Totally.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. every time we have this discussion, though, I'm always a bit like, am I just reaching?
But I love that.
Like,
I think that's part of this experience too, to wonder and question and get curious. I love your approach, Nick, on just questioning things and not being so closed off to this is the belief and this is it, but to be open to maybe, could be. I love that approach because I think it makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah. And
100%.
that's why, the utility of beliefs, it helps me to have more fun in my life, and it helps me to be able to make more content because I actually enjoy what I'm doing. I was doing green screen videos there for a while, and I'm sure you've seen me do green screen style.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of got stale, and I was like, well, I think I'm taking myself too serious. People in my life would tell me, you really seem real serious online, but in person, you're really you're the funny guy.
Right.
Like, how did you end up being this? And I think it was because I thought that was what people would help more people. That's what I thought. But that was a projection.
Yeah.
Because now at this point in my life, I'm seeing, hey, what actually helps people is actually subjective, because it helps one person and it hurts another. That's just how life is. So it's like, well, then I can't base how I make my content on how it helps someone else. I gotta base it on what's actually helping me and to live, and again, in a utility-based perspective, a more harmonious life within myself and with others. And some people might say comedy. I just had a video literally 30 minutes before this podcast. I just posted a video about numerology where Carehart was talking some crap, and people were salt in the comments about calling that out, and it was like, joking is judgment. That's what people would tell me. And I'm like, I guess you could say in a sense that we're kind of saying, hey, this might be a little ridiculous. But it's like, then my perspective is, because you have these New Earth type people that are like, you can't judge anyone. You can't very airy, we are all one. And it's like, but how do we call out BS so that we can evolve? And I think humor is a much better way to do so, because you can kind of laugh about it, and maybe they'll kind of realize the truth in it versus straight calling things out. That's why you don't see me taking the Jordan Peterson approach of just very serious. And I could be like that, but I've seen that it doesn't provide value in my life, in my daily life. And also I see that in my experience, more people will hear what you're saying through comedy than hearing what you're saying through seriousness. Yeah. That's just what I've seen in the past couple of years,
Because I think that brings their wall down. Honestly, it reminds me of my mom. So my mom and me have a very strenuous relationship sometimes. And I found that when my husband would make a joke about her comments, I'll give you an example. My mom tells me to wash my hands with soap. I'm 38 years old. I'm like, Mom, I know to use soap. I know. And so my response is always like, I know, Mom. Like, ugh. And I get all annoyed, but my husband just jokes with her like, no, we're not going to use soap. And then it just disarms her. She starts laughing, and then she can notice, oh, that's ridiculous. And I'm telling you, an adult, to use soap. But when I tell her, she, in my tone, in a very serious tone, to try to teach her the lesson or teach her what I'm trying to say, she's so much more closed off. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See the same thing online.
Yeah.
100%. I think humor is the easiest way to tell the truth.
Yeah.
That's why I started doing skits more. But I also don't want to be just doing humor, because something that also interests me is the science.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of weird, honestly, compared to most people, because there's a lot of people that are more spiritual. You see a lot of people tend to say, this is my system, whether that might be numerology, astrology, human design. It might be, I'm going to be just business, or I'm just going to be just spiritual, or I'm going to be just plant medicine, shaman. There's many different things. And for me, I'm kind of weird because I'm not really in one. I'm not just in the spiritual. I'm not just in the science, because I have done a lot of science-based videos as well. And so I think there's actually an immense amount of value that people sleep on, of helping people to understand reality through science as well as spirituality.
Yeah.
Because you have a whole subset of people out there that will deny the existence of anything spiritual because there is no evidence. And I understand that logical perspective.
Yeah.
If I have the jacket on, I need to understand that logical perspective. But at the same time, it's like there is this subjective reality. How can we link the logical what people will call objective reality to the maybe nonlinear, maybe linear, subjective experiences and symbologies and these things. So that's why I'm kind of still interested, and you'll probably see going forward a lot of podcast episodes dedicated to the science, because I think that this is important. Because going back to, you're going to get a whole subset of people, or a lot of people, that won't even believe it because there's no evidence. Well, let's show them some evidence and still say it could be, instead of saying what a lot of spiritual people do, which is, it is this way. You just haven't experienced it, or you haven't experienced it right, or my way. And if you did, you'd believe me, which is just another kind of leftover overtone of religion.
Yeah.
Because it's the same thing that people say in religion of, if you haven't experienced the presence of Jesus or Allah or these things, and that's why you don't believe it. And so I think a lot of spiritual online kind of social media things are kind of leftover religious overtones that people haven't recognized because they think it's very different. So I think it's important to be able to recognize, and just, that's why I make posts like the one a couple of days ago. It's just like, what I live by is, hey, it could be, it couldn't be. You know? So that's kind of where I'm at in life, you know.
Have you heard of the book called The Tao of Physics? I
have not. No. I'm gonna have to write that down.
I think you'd really enjoy it. I'm not fully through it, but it's by a guy named oh man, I forget his name. I want to say it's
I'll look it up.
Fritjof Capra.
Yeah, Fritjof Capra.
Wow.
Anyways, this guy is freaking smart, and he wrote this book to basically talk about how modern physics, or the languages of science, right, are really just mirroring what the Eastern mystics have been saying all along.
That's what I want to do with my life right there.
Yeah, exactly that. So I think you would love it. It gives so many examples, and I think whatever means you need to get to that sort of utilitarian place like we talked about, like whatever you need to know in order to live your life more harmoniously, do that. Because he basically talks about how, you know, neither language is superior, but, you know, he relies deeply upon a lot of these old ancient Eastern traditions. But he loves the usage of science to be able to parallel that, because he's like, there's a lot of people who are not, you know, not culturally sort of in alignment with those traditions, right? Like, I think if you, I don't know, grew up in like Bhutan or something, you know, then they get those traditions. But if you grew up in the Western world, like, you'd have to spend such a long time studying it, right? And it goes kind of against a lot of what you've been conditioned to believe, you know, with religion and all these things. So he says science is a very important tool, obviously, for helping bring so many of these truths to light. And so I think you would love that.
Yeah, I'm going to check it out for sure. And I think what's coming to me right now is there's people that would believe things based on subjective experience or no logical evidence of things. And there's people that won't believe something unless there's evidence. And so my kind of realization recently is, can I do that? Can we like come together? Can I link those two together? Like, can these people get along? Can we maybe start to come more together in the sense of can we do both? Instead of it being like because I'm sure you've seen the spiritual like, kind of enlightenment community is completely gone. They're in another dimension.
Yeah, they've left. They've ascended.
Well, they think so, but did they actually?
Right.
And I think a lot of my realizations is that no, in fact, they did not. And maybe there is some, I guess we can just call it what it is, delusion in that community. And so how can we bring it back to the rest of the world? And there might be a group of people that I think do that, and they have done that for thousands of years in monasteries. And I think there is a place for people that need no evidence of things. But I think the vast majority of humans are kind of in the middle of like maybe leaning more towards subjectivity and then maybe more logical. So as having a background, and I went to school for kinesiology and I was very logical, having that background really allowed me to kind of see that there is value in that. And I'm glad, even though I didn't use a degree and it was a way, you know, you know how much that it costs, a ridiculous amount. I don't agree with how much it costs, but I think it did teach me the value of logic. So that way I didn't get too ungrounded, because sometimes I look back at my old material, even with the Law of One, and I'm like, bro, that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
You know?
It is freaking wild. I was actually reading some of the Law of One excerpts that are in your book, and I actually want to talk about a couple sections of your book. So my favorite section so far in the book has been, I think it's chapter 3, where you give really descriptive phrases for each level of consciousness. So for example, like guilt, shame, pride, willingness. And as I was reading it, I really have to call myself out because I kind of exist a lot at the level of between pride and willingness, for sure. I think I feel the most aligned when I'm like around willingness and acceptance, but I'm not there all the time. And as I was reading the pride section, I was like, oh, that's me. Like, kind of getting excited when I get some sort of external thing. But I think that's all of us. We're conditioned to do that. Yeah. But my question is, how do we, once we become aware of what state of consciousness we're in, how do we not egoically try to get above that state of consciousness? Right? Because as I'm reading, I'm like, oh, that's where I am, right? And then I notice I can watch my mind like trying to not be in that state anymore. It's like it wants to make almost like a success of itself by getting past that level. It's like, okay, like how do I get to acceptance, right? And so it's like, instead of just being acceptance, right, it's trying to like make a task out of it. It's like a thing I have to get to. I'm falling into the illusion of time again. I need to go over there where I'm at a different level of consciousness. So do you catch yourself, I'm sure you do, in these different levels, lower levels? And when you do, what's sort of your way back up?
So I just wanted to start this conversation specifically here on this thought that there is no such thing. Well, there is kind of a such thing, but it's actually very nuanced. All of them are ego, besides enlightenment, to some extent. To some extent, because if it wasn't, it would be enlightenment. So there was different levels of it. So how I see it is, there's a lower mind and higher mind, and then there's no mind.
Yeah.
And no mind, not in the sense that there's not a mind, because I'm really of the perspective that all is mental, all is mind, the Hermetic principles. I really am on board with that. I'm saying that the personal ego self mind is no longer, because it's the presence of what some people would call God or divinity is so strong. So,
well, and I just realized as I was asking, it's mind asking.
Yes.
It's ego asking.
Ego wants to know.
Ego wants to know how to get higher ego.
Yeah.
Right.
Without it looking like ego.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So it's a tough question to answer. It's like, how can I use my mind to transcend my mind? But I think I think I've listened to Aubrey Marcus talk about this, and he actually says that he was going to write a book named Master Your Mind, but then he realized you can't master your mind.
Yeah.
And I think I understand what he's getting at, but I do think there is a level of, we can get into higher states using the mind, because I think that there's a subtle difference that I think he's missing, and it's the lower mind and higher mind. Okay. And the way we can see this is anyone who's studied the levels of consciousness. If you haven't, there's numbers, and the numbers pertain to the amount of frequency. They are not hertz, just for people that are wondering. Dr. Hawkins was specific about that. Okay. So you'd have to look at the scale, and maybe your editor could throw in the scale. The scale goes 1 to 1,000, and there's the subtle nuance between pride and courage. And then you're talking about how you're in pride and how you kind of want to go up. Well, Dr. Hawkins, the perspective of, if we're talking about that work, his perspective is that there's a spiritual will that is pulling you up, and that it is not actually the ego that wants to go up. And when you're at pride, actually what happens is that you want to spiral down. And that's why if you look at the detailed maps, it's spiraling down when starting at pride. But when you get to courage, you go up. It's willing, like it's spiraling up. And that's because there's a threshold, and the threshold is called truth versus falsehood. He wrote a whole book called Truth versus Falsehood, and he also wrote another book called Power versus Force.
I read that one.
Both of these thresholds are right at that 200 mark. So when you get to pride and you're going up, it's actually not the ego that wants to go up. or it's not the aspect of it that wants to go up. What do you call the spiritual will? Is that the ego? I don't know. So I would say it's the higher mind. And there, if you look at Dr. Hawkins' work, there's also charts as well.
Yeah.
And he has a chart of the lower mind, higher mind, and he has those in specific books. And the physiology of going into higher levels of consciousness, because there's actually physical changes that happen within the body as well and within the brain. So I guess that would be my answer, is that it's not the same thing. If you actually look at the detailedness, like you can say that we're all one, but yet we're still individuated. That's kind of how I see that process.
Okay. I'm still like thinking about what you said earlier about it's just mind or no mind. Right. And so it was funny when we were joking about how your mind, the master your mind principle is really hitting me right now, because I think attempts to master the mind with mind it's just more games with your mind.
It is, but it's a beneficial game to me. And that's why I kind of I'm a little bit different from how Marcus there. I do think there is a level of being able to master your mind, and it's through, again, the separation of the different types of mind. And it's a subjective thing. It's not something that you can quantify. It's not something that you can measure, but there is this level of, I want to get higher in the sense of, I want to be more in the state of love. Let's just say that as a baseline.
Yeah.
What is the thing that wants to be more in a state of love? Because a lot of us are conditioned to be in a state of, like, I just want to survive. I just want to make money. I just want to do these things. That's what our society says. So what is that thing? Is it mind? It could be a level of mind, but I don't think the mind is all a bad thing. And I don't think the ego, there's different differentiations. That's why if you look at the work of like Carl Jung, there's a shadow. There's the collective unconscious that also plays into these. And maybe there's parts of the collective unconscious that is actually trying to bring us up as well. So there's many factors that this could be. It also could be the sun. I have a whole chapter, not a chapter, but a part in one chapter about external influences on consciousness evolution. And the sun is one of those things. The solar cycles are one of those things. And so if you're feeling like it's ramping up, it could also be the sun's activity actually does something that's called, it increases mass excitability, which is humans get more excited when the solar cycle is reaching a maximum compared to a minimum. And this is statistically shown for at least 100 years that this is what's happening. So if the sun is heating up and we're going to get into a maximum, I think 2025 or so, the predictions are actually much higher than what we have expected. Maybe the sun is also affecting us. So it's not all complacency and kind of depression and the apathy. It's not all, I think, within us. And a lot of times we think that. Some people will take another perspective and say it's the astrology, right? If that's the thing that's causing it. Could be that as well. So I think many factors, again, I don't think that there's one system that is determining, not even our own ego, as to why we're wanting to move up.
Yeah. So for you were just saying that you find obviously the mind helpful, which it is, and then you said that you could differentiate between a few different states. What are those states?
So the states are the levels of consciousness, essentially. Like the whole. Okay, I can go through all the states if you want. The 16 different levels. Do you want me to say the levels? Okay,
go ahead.
So starting with shame, guilt, hopelessness, apathy, grief, fear. I haven't looked at them in a while.
Desires next.
Anger's next.
No, it goes desire. Then anger.
Fear, desire, anger, pride, courage, neutrality, willingness, acceptance, logic, love, joy, peace, enlightenment. See, I just kind of I got a moment where I found it. It's like I found it in my brain or wherever. But those are the different.
Activated it.
Those are different states, and I think the difference again is in power versus force. You are forcing at 199 below, 200. The different states are kind of like the spiritual will is what he called it. Again, that's the difference. I think there's this presence within us in the law of one, to get a little esoteric. They call it the blueprint of the logos. And that logos is the thing that's propelling us, because the question was asked in the law of one, like, what is propelling us to want to be in service to others? Like, why do we want to help other people, and why do we want to be more loving? And it's like, well, the blueprint of everything, or what they call the logos, is love. So there's something within us that we have that blueprint. We're trying to follow that blueprint, but we don't even know that we're trying to follow it. And then, there's different aspects of who's trying to follow it. There's the soul trying to follow it. And then there's the distinction of the soul and the body. I think this is actually a great answer to your question that I'm the one that I'm about to say, because I feel like I wasn't super clear. Let's dial it in a little bit. I also say in the book that there's something called a soul personality and a body personality. The body personality is the personality that you've developed throughout this entire life, and it's what the body wants to do. Now, there's also the soul personality, and the soul personality is your personality based on how many lives that you've lived and your experiences during those lives. So I think when I say that there's the mind and the mind and the mind and the mind, what I'm saying is that there might be a soul. And the soul is the thing that might be the one that's wanting to progress spiritually. This is something that has been well documented in Eastern traditions for thousands of years, that the soul is the one that wants to progress, because the soul wants to escape the wheel of what they call samsara, which is the cycle of reincarnation, and they eventually want to achieve enlightenment. And so that's kind of how they see it. In Dr. Hawkins' work and my work also all kind of intermingle together in that state of like, there's something that's pulling us up. You can call it a soul, you can call it God, you can call it many different things. I think it's just this animating essence of kind of fundamental awareness, kind of intermingled with the soul's experiences and a level of remembrance. I'm one who actually has a perspective that a lot of people have about remembrance. I'm one who thinks that if you've incarnated more, there's a level of you being able to kind of crack through the forgetting more. It's just this concept that I've kind of contemplated. It could or couldn't be true, but it seems like the more that I see this, I'm not saying that I even have that, but it would make sense in a game.
Yeah.
That if you play it more, you can kind of get through the barriers easier. So that's something that I've kind of been playing around with too.
Well, even with video games, if you think about like Super Mario, like even though there's new video games, because you've played the first few, you know how to do the different things in the new version. So that makes sense. I like that. I would agree with that.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I love your brain, Nick. Okay.
It's not mine. It's just the one I'm using.
It's just the one that I'm coming through.
Right.
It's oh man.
I have a question. I want to go back to when you were talking about the content that you make, because this is actually a topic I've asked other people on the podcast as well. And this whole thought about wanting to help people. And I oscillate between, okay, if you're going to create content or you're going to be helping people, do you do it from the place of what's going to help them or what's going to help you? And you said you create from a place of what helps you. But there's a lot of other people that are like, no, I want to create for others and I'm serving others. And it's not about what it is for them. So I'd love for you to touch more on that.
It's a great question. I see it as I take certain perspectives that will help me, and then I'm just myself. And I put that out there to help others. And the people that will get value from that perspective will get value.
Yeah.
So I'm not making the content to help myself. I have the perspective that helps me in my actual life, because I don't want to be fake and be this person online and have different beliefs in person, because there are a lot of people like that.
Yeah.
And so I'm just trying to connect what actually helps me tangibly with how can I share that with people. So.
That's actually exactly what I do, where I just have an insight or a perspective and it's just me sharing it. But I will say that I'm kind of running into the problem that I think you were for a little while, where you were like, I feel like my page is more serious than I am in real life.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I don't know what people's perception of me is online, and that's not really real anyways. But I feel like I'm the most authentic on the podcast, and I feel like you might feel the same way about yourself, because you're just being you and you're just talking to people. But I feel like when I show up online, I'm like, okay, I'm sharing something that I use in my life. I don't know. I like take on, it's so funny. Like, I'm laughing at myself now because I kind of take on this like teacher persona, which I do like to embody at times, right? But I'm just like you said at the beginning, like I'm just a girl from Tennessee.
There it is. That's right. And so that's why I started doing skits more.
Yeah.
And I haven't done it in a while because I had some health issues, and I'm coming back from that. And trying to manage a podcast and get it running efficiently. And, you'll see doing in-person ones, there's a lot of extra effort that goes into that.
Yeah,
Totally.
So I love the style of skits and of being comedic. And so that's why the content switch is kind of happening between that.
Yeah.
But I also think it's okay to
an
be a
evolution.
teacher because,
Yeah.
hey, that's part of who you are. You don't have to always be the same part either. So you can bring out different aspects of self. And what I'm saying is that a lot of people will bring out just one aspect of their persona versus like all of them. And I think it's much easier to do it just naturally in a conversation.
Yeah.
Versus,
Totally.
making a video, because then it's dialed in. You're talking about a specific thing and you have to relay that specific thing in a specific way. So you kind of have to choose which way am I going to relay this. So it's nuanced. So that's kind of how I feel.
Totally. I feel like in podcasts, I almost like forget myself. I know I'm here and I'm talking, but when it's video format, I'm really having to look at and focus on the self.
Well, yeah.
But anyways, I wanted to ask you, Nick, you know how we've talked a lot about thoughts that have value to us in order to help us live more harmonious lives. Is there any thought that you used to hold, any beliefs that you just no longer do?
I'd say it's a perception that of course, there's plenty of things that I used to hold, but a certain perception that comes to mind to me is just, I think my relationship to the past has changed.
Oh.
And I realized that it's so futile to even really have any sort of guilt for how things went or what you did. And I think that it's futile if you're just beating yourself up, which is something that I've done a lot.
Yeah, same.
And so
how did you get out of that? What is now your relationship to the past?
It's now more like I can just learn things without having to beat myself up. And that's actually valuable to me. And my relationship with the self has changed to just understand that, hey, if you're coming into a world that nobody knows what anything really is in terms of like the rules in themselves are made up by people that came in before me.
Yeah.
And those rules may not be correct. And the rules about how society is ran, and also the rules of how I see myself or how most people see themselves. So to just understand that gives me a sense of compassion for myself versus judgment of you should have known better, you should have done this. It's like, well, you're in a game where nobody remembers where they came from. We can just relax a little bit and we can figure it out. And I think reaching your potential is important. And the potential is determined by that person as well. What is potential? That's another question that I've been sitting with too.
Me too. Well, it's funny because potential, people want to reach it, but I'm like, potential's always more.
Yeah.
Like you can't reach it because as soon as you get to one level of it, there's more. Potential is the energy that has not really been embodied yet, but there will always be more of that. So it's like a losing game trying to reach your potential.
It depends. I think you can reach your potential daily.
Yes.
So if I wake up in the morning, I'm like, hey, my potential for today is maybe I write down these are the 3 things that I want to do. And what is a perception that I want to take today? How do I want to feel today? And if I take those and I'm like, well, this is what I think my potential is for this day. And then if I reach that, to me, that's reaching my potential versus making it this overarching, I need to be better, which is what a lot of people will do.
Yes. And then it's like they're just behind the 8 ball. They can't get ahead.
It can feel
and
that
then
way.
the potential. Yeah, and then the potential is the thing that almost stops them from taking action in the present, which is the only thing that you can actually do, right? They might become so overwhelmed by this idea of potential. It's like, oh, well, I'm not reaching potential. But it's like, the only way you reach potential is by taking an action right now. Like there's just one thing you could do right now. And I think so many people don't realize really where their power lies, which is right now, right? There's only all you can do right in this moment. And the only thing that keeps you from those things are just stories, right? And I know, like you said, one of yours was obviously the relationship to the past. I think a lot of us are like just stuck in this maze of just like what happened, what could have happened, what should have happened. And then we just stay frozen in this moment. So we're not able to take any forward momentum. And I think the reason why we suffer so much is because like life is already moving on, but we're not. Like the energy is flowing forward and we're just like staying in the mind with everything that once was. And that's why it's so painful, I think, to think about the past in a negative way, at least.
Yeah, Joe Dispenza talks about that a lot. He talks a lot about how if we can release the emotion from the past, then we're left with the wisdom that you were talking about, Nick. Like we learn the lesson, but so many of us are attached to the story of the past, which then creates the suffering, right? Give it meaning. It now determines how we create our future because everything is through the lens of that past. So I think we've both been on that same journey of detaching from the story of what happened and detaching from the shame and the guilt of I should have known better, because I do believe that we're always doing the best that we can with what we know in that moment. And that has to be enough. It has to be enough. My new line right now is constantly saying, all I can do is all I can do. And it's
or
just...
B.
Yes, exactly. Instead of thinking that, yeah, we have to do everything right all the time. So it kind of goes back to the randomness. I think sometimes things just need to happen to then inspire a different thought. I don't know.
Yeah. Could be.
Could be.
Could be. We're just learning. I feel like the theme of this really is just, it could be, and you just have to see for yourself. You know, when it comes to, especially like manifestation, and I'm sure you've talked to other people about this as well, I just tell people to use their own life as an experiment.
Yeah.
Because I really think, you know, you're not going to just believe the words I say, right? Like you need to experience that. And so it's up to you whether you want to try to orient yourself to that perspective. You don't have to. There's no requirement. Like you can do whatever you want. That's the free will. But no one's going to believe you until they've gone through it.
Do you think we have free will?
Big question.
I feel...
You said free will, so
well,
you did this to yourself.
I know. I actually knew you were going to ask me that. But you know how earlier you talked about how the ego doesn't want to rise. It's like the spiritual will.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
I guess if we're the spiritual will and not the ego... I don't know.
That's a good answer.
Like,
I don't know is a good answer.
Yeah. Well,
honestly, I love people
know.
that say that. It's great because you know you're not trying to you don't have to make it, go through the whole process right now. It's like I don't know. You know what I'm saying? I think it's good to admit sometimes because I don't know either. That's my answer as well. I don't know.
I often ask myself before I'm about to do something like, is this really me wanting to do it? Or is this like the conditioned part of me that wants to do it?
Yeah.
And I think that's free will. Free will is being able to be the one that's not conditioned making the decision. Because I don't think that me, for example, like when I was growing up, my parents really wanted me to study, like to go to medical school or be like a pharmacist or a nurse. My dad was in medicine and they just believed that was the way for me to like secure safety and belonging. And so I think I can like, someone could say, oh, it was my free will I decided to go to medical school, right? But I'm like, did you decide to go to medical school? Like your consciousness, like the unique spark that is you, like, is that what you really wanted for yourself? Or like, did you just decide that based on the programming and the experiences and the ways that you've been taught to believe? And so I think that's the free will. Like me deciding to not do that was almost like the free will because that was like me going against the conditioned part of me. And I think a lot of us are believing we have free will, but in reality, just making decisions from the conditioned part of us. So we're not free at all. We're totally living these like default sort of robotic lives, which is why most people's lives look similar, right? And I think, radical people or people that you call mavericks or renegades, like they, I guess, are exercising a bit more free will because they are acting from not that part of their mind that's deeply conditioned. They're thinking freely for themselves, but that's my take.
Hey listeners, quickly interrupting this episode to say that if you're loving this conscious conversation, we're inviting you to join the dialogue with us inside of our free Spiralinghigher community.
It's our favorite place on earth, and it's where you can meet like-minded souls on their healing journey and discuss what you're spiraling through with your conscious besties.
It's where we continue this conversation long after the episode ends because, as we all know, healing is an upward spiral.
So join the conversation, share with us your insights, questions, and breakthroughs. We're here for it all.
You can join by creating a free account by clicking the link at the top of the show notes.
Can't wait to see you in there. Yeah, well, I'm finding that, the most spiritual people don't know what that means. Like they're just
Mm-hmm.
the most spiritual people are really maybe not even like us, right? They're not seeking, they're not reading, they're
What
not
do you mean by
listening.
spiritual? I gotta know.
Someone who's deeply connected to the energy of love.
Love. Okay. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone who's deeply connected to the energy of love. They're in acceptance of what is, right? And they're in non-judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that these are people who are just like, you know, living in the mountains, you know, or like, you know, going fishing every day.
So what do you
like?
This is great. I'm glad that you said that. When you say non-judgment, do you see judgment as a bad thing?
I see judgment as a thing that creates conflict.
Okay. So this is good because I've been contemplating this and I love your perspective. When do you call things out that you think are what's a good word? I don't know if hurting people. It's kind of what I'm thinking, but it's not like hurting. It's like when people are manipulating other people, how do you call them out in a way that is not judging? Because that's what the guy in the comments said earlier, that you're judging if you're joking. So was there value in judging?
But does that mean like every comedian is like judging?
Right.
Right? Because like all of
that's what I said back, actually.
They're all jokes.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, they're all jokes, right? And we laugh because it's true and it's funny, right?
Yeah.
So is that judgment or is it more like exposing judgment? I don't know. I feel like jokes expose judgment without really judging.
Yeah. It's like, can we just open up a little bit and see? You know, hey, maybe saying these things are kind of ridiculous in terms of some people say. There's a million different things that I think are ridiculous, and I think it's depending on the person. But I think it's if you're like talking crap versus like in a way that's like you're directly insulting the person versus saying, hey, you're thinking this way and it's kind of ridiculous, and I'm going to make a skit about it, or
I think the intention is always everything, though, because I think even with comedians, sometimes it is to shed light on something in a light way that people are going to absorb it. But then there are people that are going to do it maliciously. Even spiritual teachers, they might be talking about things that are coming from the ego, but maybe they would be making a judgment where it's not coming from ego. And again, it's coming from a place of love just to shine light on something. So I think the intention behind it is everything.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I think judgment can really only happen if you think you're right. Right? Like that's the only way judgment happens. I think if you don't think you're right and you're willing to take the position that maybe you aren't right, then there's just curiosity.
Yes.
And I think curiosity is the antidote to any judgment or conflict, because when it comes to like, let's say I am in a conflict with someone and I'm saying like, well, you did this and then you were wrong. Like the only way we're gonna sort of reduce the tension is by me getting curious as to why they did that. And I can only get curious about that if I'm willing to assume the position that I don't know everything, right? That they made that decision or said that thing based on something that I'm not aware of, right? Sometimes when you do have an interaction with someone who's, let's say, in an angry mood and you find out that like XYZ happened earlier in the day, then you're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And there's less judgment, right? Because there's more curiosity. So I think judgment, is it wrong? No, it just really reflects that you think you're right, which is that wrong?
Well, here, let me tell you, this is the conclusion of my perspective on this. There's a difference between judgment and logic. All of the comedians that are like, well, not all of them, but comedians in general on Dr. Hawkins' scale calibrate at 480, which is logic. Like 400. They don't calibrate in judgment. And the reason why is because you have to logically be able to understand something before you make fun of it. And so humor in itself is actually calibrating high because it's very close to love, because love is right above logic. And so according to Dr. Hawkins, anybody who's comedian and they're doing it in a loving way, that they actually calibrate high on the scale. So because if you logically, like for example, if Gerhardt logically thought, people manipulating other people, she thought that was incorrect. It doesn't mean they're judging. I think there's a difference between like logically coming to a conclusion and then judging someone and their character based on that. So there is a subtle difference there. And according to like the consciousness scale, that would be why that makes sense. I'm glad that I kind of brought that in there because I think that was the clearest way that I relayed that thought so far.
Yeah, and it makes so much sense to me that he would rate the or calibrate the comedians at reason, because to be honest, it can't be funny unless it's true.
Yes.
Right. Unless you're doing like ridiculous, like Jim Carrey stuff. I mean,
yeah, unless it's like physical humor.
Yeah.
But I think for it to be funny, there has to be a sliver of truth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you don't get the joke.
Right. I'm with you for sure. Yeah. I'm glad we came to that. That was good.
I
Overall,
love that.
You know? So.
Universe the game.
That's right.
This is us. Well, Nick, you're just such a light. You're so funny, and I love that you can be funny and or serious. I think that all of those are parts of you, and that you got to bring honestly both of them here today. I feel like we got to experience both.
Yeah, I feel like I'm stepping more into that, and as someone who's again made content since 2015, it's kind of just been this evolution of like I'm always authentic. I don't think it's not that I'm not authentic. It's that I'm authentically who I am in that moment.
Yeah.
And then that will consistently change.
Yes.
So back in 2015, when I was pushing trucks, making making kind of those videos and, trying to being strong and doing strongman type stuff and bodybuilding, it's like, that's who I was.
Yeah.
But I think that the character can change in who we decide to be, because everyone is deciding to be who they are in terms of not necessarily their physical, what happens in their life and where they are, but they get to decide and define themselves every single day. So to me, it was about defining, and someone who's made content for a long time, how do I want to define myself, and how do I want people to feel when they watch my videos, and how do I want people to feel when they hear me speak? And when I leave this body, how do I want people to feel at my funeral? How did I impact people, and in what way? Because I went to doing other things, and then I felt like that wasn't fulfilling in the way that I wanted. So I think there's a lot of people out there that are kind of struggling to find a sense of fulfillment, but also enjoy life, because people will think, through my experience of observing and friends, and you'll either need to do something fulfilling and not enjoy it, or do something enjoyable, but it's not really super fulfilling. But I think what I'm trying to relate to people is that, hey, it's a game. You can enjoy the game, but also do things that are fulfilling. But I also think on another note that it is very important for people to be able to do things that are difficult for the sake of doing them. And I know that might sound weird to someone who hasn't heard that concept. And I'm not saying you have to do it to the extreme of David Goggins. For those that know David Goggins, who just running 20 miles a day.
Crazy.
But there is an aspect of truth in what he's saying where, hey, if I'm doing things in order to get beyond what my current mind is telling me I should do, then I can consistently do that in my life. And a really good example for me is I recently started doing cold plunges, and I thought it was bro science. But it actually turns out
real science.
There's a lot of research behind that. And I've had a lot of people come on my podcast and say, hey, cold plunge, cold therapy, they're doing these things. And I'm in a place, there's a pool, and it's not crazy cold. It's 57, 56, which I looked at the studies, and that's like the minimum, around 60 degrees. So I'm at the minimum. So I'm a rookie out here, but I do see massive benefits of like actually going in there. And my mind does not want to go in there. But I will have to talk to myself sometimes. We turn that music on, get some Supertramp going or something like that, and just classic rock, and we just get in there. And I just say, I am doing this. No matter what this has to say, I am doing this. And that can be so many different things in life. But for me, it's been cold. And the more that I do that, I can edit stuff when I don't feel like it. I can make skits when my mind doesn't want to do it, but there's no real logical reason. Now, I'm not saying you have to force.
Yeah.
But when there's like something that is beneficial that you could translate. Maybe a better example is food. I have options of all these different types of food. There's like candy, there's stuff that is not that great for you. But if I just went in the cold plunge and I felt unstoppable, I'm probably not going to go get the food that I feel like is just going to undo everything I did. Right. So that level of momentum, and for some people it's working out, running, meditating. I think all of those are also beneficial. I'm not saying that they're not. So I just think it's important to also kind of ground this conversation out by just saying like, hey, it's not that you're just flowing, but you're also learning how to do things that your mind doesn't want to do that you know are beneficial. And we've talked about the subtle separation between those. And then that will translate to every area of your life. So that's something that I've just been experiencing, you know?
Well, I think unless you understand that there is a subtle separation between those, then you'll just be a servant of the mind. And so every time the mind says, I don't want to, then, or I do want to, then you just do what it wants or doesn't want. And I think that's where we lose the quote unquote free will, right? You're just moving with this mind, right? That's, you know, either craving or experiencing aversion to something. And then I think that free will is you saying like, no, like we're going, we're jumping in, right? There's everything in you is screaming, I don't want to, but there's something higher than that. There's something that's aware of that and overriding that. And I think
something that's aware of that. That's a perfect way to say that.
Something that's aware of that, right? Because I like, okay, like this morning I woke up and I could definitely feel like I don't really want to like shower or anything. Like I just want to roll out of bed. But I was like, no, like I know that like going to the gym and showering is going to make me feel better. And so that was a thing that the mind was like, we don't want to do that. And I was like, no, I know you don't, but we are. So that's interesting that there's something that my mind wants to do or doesn't want to do, but there's something that's watching that and making a decision from a different place.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's what goes back to what you're saying, that the mind, can you master the mind? So that example right there is a great example of like, what is the thing that is aware? Like that's how you can kind of start to see that, hey, this might be a character and the character body might want certain things and that there's a difference. I feel like so I've heard arguments against free will, and I've never heard one that I have found to be something that was like, okay, because I'm open. Hey, you know, even human design, which I love human design, but they say there's passenger consciousness. There's no free will. Oh,
really? In human design, no free will?
Yeah. I'm like 90% sure on that. But they call it passenger consciousness of you are just kind of watching a movie. So that's another question. Universe movie, universe game? Who knows? But
I've definitely resonated a lot with the movie analogy.
Yeah.
Movie metaphor. Yeah. I really feel sometimes like when I'm super present, like I'm just watching a movie. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, that's passing through my awareness now. And it's just, everything's just like in a sequence. But more harmful is when I'm seeing movies in my mind though. Like I think there's like the movie of like life, like reality, like what's literally happening right now, this conversation. But then there's a movie that could also be happening in my brain that like, which would be my thoughts and perceptions about this conversation. And I think most people live in that movie, the mind movie, rather than like the life movie. I've been trying to live my life movie rather than my mind movie.
Yeah, it just goes back to the algorithm. The algorithm is going to feed you certain images in your mind, and is that actually reality? And what is reality? You know, we got to ask that question too.
The present moment.
Yeah.
The present moment. That's it.
Or your perception of it.
No, I think reality is the present moment, and then your perception of it is not reality. That's your mind.
It's your reality. Is there an objective reality though?
Yes.
Right. That's what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah. The present moment is reality. Like the moment that would be here if all humans were wiped out and it was just animals. Like that it'd be this. But then your perception of it is your reality. We talked about that, Nick, actually on your podcast. There's one Earth, but 7+ billion realities, so to speak.
Yeah.
Everyone's, you know, what I've realized is everyone is just in their own world.
Yeah. They're in their own movie.
And then and then it's rare when you meet someone who's like kind of living in a similar world and then you vibe with that person. But even then you're still in your own world.
That's what my content is for. It's like, hey, this is the world that I've found, the reality that I've found the most helpful and enjoyable to live and helpful to the world, because I don't just want to be someone who's doing things that are helpful to me in order to get me to a certain status or to get me to a place where I have certain things. So that's why I think like I said earlier, fulfillment and enjoyment. These two things are, I think, important to find a balance, because it can be enjoyable and something that is fulfilling and of value to the world. And I think it is a responsibility for each one of us to provide some sort of value to the world in some respect. And whether that is value in love, whether that's a value in the things that you do, I think it can be so simple. It doesn't have to be necessarily you work super hard, but it's also how are you treating others? That is valuable to the world, because I think that the ultimate kind of place that we're heading, I've had this conversation many times with many people, and I'd love to hear your perspective. Do you think the world is ever going to be one that's loving? Is Earth ever going to be loving, or is it designed to not be loving? Because Dr. Hawkins used to say, if you didn't have Earth, you'd need to make another one, because the Earth is a place that is designed for the maximum karmic growth, was what he used to say.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
are we ever going to get there? Or is it designed to be this?
It's kind of like, are we ever going to be enlightened? It feels like the same thing. It's like, I don't know. Like if people, I don't know if I believe that. Like, do people just literally attain enlightenment and then just like hang out there? I don't know.
That
like,
Abraham Hicks always says, then you're dead. Right?
Exactly.
That you're just basically, if you want to get to a point where you experience no contrast, nothing negative, you're just constantly in every moment,
you're
just
dead.
high. Then that's being in the spiritual realm. That's not going to fully exist in this 3D world. Otherwise, you only experience that essentially when you're dead.
Yeah, and I feel like we're like totally fed like this idea that like basically like through perfect action and perfect will, that you will be enlightened, and then that's a spiritual ego.
That's what it says in Buddhism: is right will. There's 8 tenets, and it's right. That's actually the word that they use, right.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I think I knew that.
There's Buddhism is really interesting, and yes, to answer your question or to answer what you're saying, they do think that they reach enlightenment, and that is the ultimate point of reality. The point of this world, from a Buddhist perspective, is to reach enlightenment.
See, like I have definitely had moments in my life where I know I'm there, but I don't
think you
there,
stay
like,
there. I think the point of life can be to reach it so that you can keep on reaching for it as you inevitably cycle in and out of it. But I don't know if I believe that you just stay, unless, I mean, you're a monk and you meditate for 24 hours a day, maybe.
Are you saying staying in enlightenment?
Yeah, like I feel like most people would cycle in and out of that once you've reached that.
Yeah, so there's a couple different perspectives you could take here. There's types of Buddhas. I don't know if you guys know that, but there's like the Buddhas that come back to this world, the Bodhisattva, and then there's the Buddhas that actually don't come back to this world once they attain enlightenment.
And that's the goal, to not come back, right?
Well, no, actually, the Buddha actually did come back after achieving enlightenment, because the subtle difference is the Buddha comes back to help the world to reach enlightenment, to help others. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the goal. The goal is to achieve enlightenment, but what you do beyond that, it's kind of like the same concept as Buddhism has there. Also, Law of One had. It said there's wanderers, and the wanderers come and they incarnate and help people to evolve, and they choose to stay. But they're not necessarily enlightened, but there's people that come and they incarnate. Now, again, that's esoteric. I'm not saying that's the truth, but there is this concept throughout the world. And now, who knows if we're going to reach there? My understanding and my perspective is that, yes, we all will reach enlightenment individually in an infinite amount of time. It's a possibility. That's how I see it.
Okay, I wanna keep talking about this, because this actually conflicts with Power of Now from Eckhart Tolle, right? Because he talks about how like anything that you believe you can attain in the future like is an illusion, because you're falling into the belief that there is a time other than now for you to be able to do that. You create the illusion of time. And so trying to reach enlightenment is like, oh, in the future when I reach it. He's like, you're already behind it. Like there is, do you know what I mean? It's like, if I was going to reach it, it would have to happen through this moment. Like I would have to just figure out what's stopping me from feeling that in this moment now. There is no place that I get to in the future.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like okay, like if I'm going to reach enlightenment, it's presupposing that that's going to be sometime later, right? But in doing that, I create the illusion of time, which makes it impossible for me to reach it.
Why would that make it impossible?
Because I'm only going to ever attain it through the now.
Right.
So I guess I'd arrive in a new now, where I would
Right.
have a new
I
awareness
mean, it'd
and
be
be
the
able to
same
attain it.
now because the now never ends.
Yeah.
It's just like if you were in a video game, is there time in the game? Yes or no? Is that time real? Yes or no? Is it an illusion? Yes or no? Is there a realm time and a time outside that? Maybe. So I understand what he's saying, and I think it's actually coming at an unintuitive approach for enlightenment that will help in this context. If you think about enlightenment as something you already are versus something you need to attain, it's a different energy.
Right.
So if you already are
Yes.
that, it's like, well, at some point if we can at least come to the agreement that there is a sense, an experience that we are having that seems to be your body will grow old, and that's a potential to happen at some point in the now moment. If we're able to have that perspective of like, okay, well, that's a possibility that it could happen. Maybe that it might not be like real in the same way that a game isn't real, but it's still a possibility that it could exist. If that's the case, then if we are all already enlightened, like Dr. Hawkins also used to say, stop being unenlightened. Like it's already like it's there because it's there. It's like the sun. So if we think of enlightenment as the sun is there, but there's just clouds, at some point those clouds are going to be removed. But do we have control over that? Is it spontaneous? Because many people who have achieved this so-called enlightenment have achieved it spontaneously. They were actually at the lowest levels of consciousness, and then all of a sudden, boom. So it's not always a stairway of I'm going to get there eventually, but it's a possibility that it could happen to the point where I think of it like this. How do I put this into words? Because this is really difficult to put in words. There's like a infinite blanket, and you are like this piece that's coming up on this blanket, and you eventually will go down, just as the consciousness that we are experiencing as individual is like a whirlpool in the water, and we identify as a whirlpool, but eventually we may become the entire ocean. Even though we're just a whirlpool at that moment, we were the entire time the ocean, but we just called ourselves the whirlpool. So when we say enlightenment, I think we're more getting at that aspect. We are already surrounded and are that in the fundamental core, just as a whirlpool is water. But we call it something different. So that's kind of how I see it. And I understand what Eckhart Tolle is saying, because it's like, yeah, well, you can't do it except for right now. So that also makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, it totally makes sense. I've heard people say, like, you're the ocean believing that you're a wave.
Yeah, that's another way.
Same thing. Yeah, wave is ocean, right? It's just a manifestation of ocean. Like,
for sure.
But yeah, I'm really trying to think about the utility of this belief of enlightenment in my life, because if I believe enlightenment is like fully possible as a state for me to realize, I guess, in waking life, and that it should be the goal of my life, I don't know if that helps me, to be honest.
Depends on what is your goal in life.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, if it is enlightenment.
No, I'm saying help you do what? What does it not help you? Like when you say it doesn't help you, what does it not help you?
Oh, it doesn't help me feel peace now.
Right.
Which I believe is one of the ingredients for enlightenment.
So it should help you if
do you
that's
see how
your goal.
But it's conflicting,
Why?
right? Like, it's like I actually experience more peace if I believe that that's something. And this is just me right now. Sure. It could change. But if I believe that it's something that it's actually not possible for me to attain that at all times, which brings peace to whatever I'm experiencing now. Because if I'm not experiencing like current enlightenment, then I'd be like, well, I'm not supposed to, so it's okay, right? But if I believe that was like where I needed to be, then what I'm saying to myself is, you're not there, and that's wrong. And then I experience inner conflict.
Well,
so that's interesting.
Well, I think
that's just my personal experience.
Sure, yeah. When I think about that, to me, it brings up this thought process of what are you using permission slips to feel a certain way? And if the word enlightenment doesn't give you that permission slip, but not being enlightened does give you permission slip for peace, they're both looking to achieve peace, to me.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if enlightenment is a state of peace, I don't think it's also about looking at like, hey, all the time. It's just like, Enlightenment is a combination of all of the lower levels into one. Well, we never really even established for this conversation a definition of what enlightenment actually is, which I think is important to go back to.
Yes.
Enlightenment is actually the inclusion of all emotions, not the negation of all emotions. If you take certain Eastern philosophies, it's actually negation-based. Some of them are inclusion-based. And what that means is you're going to say, I am not that, I am not that, I am not that, until you reach a certain level of enlightenment. That's one level. There are also levels to enlightenment. There's the void, there's the allness, there's omnipresence, omnipotence. So it also depends on what level of enlightenment you're talking about. And there's only a handful of people that have ever reached 1,000, which is the full enlightenment according to Dr. Hawkins. So when we say like it doesn't help you, I think it really comes back to, like I asked, like help you to do what? To feel peace. If you're trying to feel peace, that inherently is what that is. So if you feel like you're going to get peace through another means, you're still on that path, even if you don't realize it.
You're just calling it something different.
Right.
Just calling it something different. Yeah. Well, yeah, and that makes sense. It's like you can believe in whatever religion you need to, whatever gets you there. That's kind of like where I'm at with that. I'm like, I don't care what you believe, like whatever makes you feel peaceful and loving and service oriented, like go for it. So it's like just what works for you. And I mean, that's why there's so many different teachers, right? There's a way of listening and speaking and hearing and digesting that will work for one and not another. And yeah, it's just really interesting because when I think of enlightenment, I'm like, oh damn, like
I don't get to experience this anymore or something like that. That's how I kind of feel. It's like you feel like, oh, well, if I reach that, then I'm not going to experience the same type of joy. I've had kind of personal experiences, but I just want to say for the record, I am not at a level of enlightenment. I'm just someone who just kind of because some people might think that that's what I think about myself.
Right.
So I just got to put that out there, that is not what I'm claiming in any means. But I've just studied a bunch of different stuff, and this is just what I'm talking about. That's why I always say according to this tradition, that because I'm very intentional about like these are not necessarily all my perspectives, and I feel like it gives actually more credibility when you cite your sources, which a lot of people don't do. So I just wanted to say that's something that's important for me to mention.
I mean, would you even trust anyone that said I'm enlightened? Would you be
Totally.
No, because Dr. Hawkins said anyone that claims enlightenment, you can already automatically tell that they're not enlightened.
Yes.
Because anyone who actually claimed enlightenment, there would be no I to claim it anymore. Because that's what enlightenment is.
Yes.
Yeah, the dissolution of the I, the self, the small self.
Right. Exactly.
There's no one there. There's no one to be you're
It's all.
So funny.
It's all, which is weird to contemplate. It's like this concept of allness. If we go to the Hermetic principles, they are of the perspective, principle number 1, all is mind. The Kabbalion is also the book related to Hermetic principles. So it's free online, Kabbalion.com, I think. So if you want to just go look at it, you can, all the different principles. The principles are some of the most profound things I've ever come across. And I think it really pertains to this conversation because they're saying all is mind, all is mental. So what we're experiencing is the one mind thinking intelligence into sentience. And so that's when we say God, they actually say in Hermeticism, the all, because the all is that mind. And also the law of one says the same type thing. We are all thoughts. And just as though the Hermetic principle says we are thoughts, that there's polarity, the law of the principle of polarity, the law of correspondence, as above, so below. That's why the second principle, the correspondence, I'm 90% sure it's the second. Again, hey, that's the way she goes. But it's one of the principles. And that one really is what led me to the conclusion of universe the game. Because when I thought about as above, so below, a lot of people forget about the second part of that, as below, so above. So if that's the case, if I'm experiencing games, then there's maybe this is a game. And I think that Inception, the movie, is also a fantastic way to look at it. I don't think there's a better or worse way. Looking at it as a dream within a dream, to me, is very similar in a game within a game, in a movie within a movie. We have these, how did they come up with Inception, by the way? Like, that is really interesting that got put out there. I'd say Inception is one of the best movies ever made.
I love it.
Hands down. And I really love going into movies and the truth that I find within movies, because I think that's one of the most powerful things. If I have enough resources, and I'm surrendered if this does happen, but I would love to make short films about concepts like that, and kind of have it take on another meaning and kind of explore that idea more, because I think movies are so powerful. When we see acting and these things, and we get lost in it because maybe we know that there's some aspect of truth to certain parts. Maybe there isn't,
Yes.
So, for example, I think the Marvel movies have a ridiculous amount of truth, but they also have a ridiculous amount of distortion. So I'm not saying that it's all truth and then, you go watch it, because no, they put some BS in there. But that's why I've really loved shows like Loki, like Moon Knight.
Oh, I love Loki.
Those shows are fantastic. Even the concept in WandaVision of, getting put into a TV show and then living different TV shows out. But then at the end realizing that, I'm actually just making this all up in my mind because I haven't come to the conclusion that my husband's dead. And it's like, I'm just kind of...
Wait, which one is this?
It's WandaVision. Yeah, spoiler.
Oh.
Well, no, it's not really a spoiler, because you already know that he died in one of the Vision.
I haven't seen that.
Dies in it. But that's kind of the concept of like, hey, am I thinking it's a game, or am I thinking I'm in a show just to like cope? And am I actually coming to that conclusion? So that's why I'm also like, hey, it's not for everyone. And I think it can be used in a way that's harmfully, just like everything. Yes. So that's why it's not all the ultimate truth, and it can be kind of skewed. So that's another thing to just realize. It's like, hey, one thing can help, one thing can hurt. I think it helps me. And I've come to that conclusion. And I try to back that up with research and things. And I've done videos on the simulation, on the holographic universe, and how the universe actually is holographic, and the evidence of that from the quantum evidence to the actually holographic researchers, holographic brain, Carl Pribram, how our brain might actually be just taking in certain sensory inputs. And when we take in those inputs, are those actually real, or is it our brain that translates interference patterns, waves into particles? So is there actually, outside of our eyes, is there just waves that our eyes or our senses has translated? So is reality all just interference patterns that we're all just like translating into our own experience? Who knows? So there's many things. I'm not trying to say that, there is no evidence of the universe being game, because there is. So that's also important to me. It's like I said earlier, logic and spiritual, kind of bringing these together.
Totally. Actually, what you were just saying about what we're seeing, we heard Abraham say something about that when we were at the workshop, Gina. Remember? She was saying that, or they were saying that seeing is not the right word. She said translation is better. Yeah. Like that your eyes are translating, waves, particles. Like you're not seeing what's there. It's like I don't know if that makes sense.
Right. It's called Fourier transforms is actually the scientific term. It's a type of math that we can use that translates. Our brain runs on Fourier transforms. And I just got goggles from when I was swimming, just chilling. I don't know why that's in my hand. But that's just what happens sometimes. I forget to put stuff away. Don't ask my girlfriend about that. Because sometimes I get a little... I think, honestly, I've gotten a lot better in the last couple of years, especially since we lived in the rooftop tent. But anyways, let me finish that last thought. Now, Fourier transforms is what our brain uses to kind of translate the environment, and Fourier transforms has been shown as a mathematic principle that these actually work. So, and they work in math in general. So when you say seeing isn't really accurate, it's like it's transforming. It's actually interpreting. Just like if I didn't understand a language, I would need a translator. Just like our eyes might be that translator for us. And maybe different animals have different sets of translation. So they're seeing way different stuff than we are. And we know that through the electromagnetic spectrum.
Totally.
And, what the types of vision, infrared, some animals can see. And, so I just think it's interesting to contemplate and to also say, hey, if we can only see 1% of what's happening, if that's actually a true statement, which is what science tells us, What's going on? We've got radio waves. People will say, I don't believe it till I see it, but we believe in radio waves.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi,
yeah.
So there's many
Love.
things. Well, okay, yeah, that's another one. So, I don't know.
It's crazy to me to think that we're so addicted to the world of form, right? We think that that's all there is, like our body, the earth. But there is a 99, I don't know, isn't it more than 99% of everything that's just non-physical, and we're just not paying attention to that?
Right, that's what kind of what I do is.
Yeah, that's what you do. You pay attention to that.
Let's look a little bit at this. It seems maybe like it might help our civilization. But again, I'm actually contemplating are we ever going to evolve to a loving society? Or is this just something where we come here and it is this way? And we learn to be loving in a non-loving society? Because I think a lot of people in the spiritual community will wait for New Earth to come along and save them from everything. But it's like, well, maybe that's not going to come. And I think putting all the eggs in the basket of, in the future it will be better because I think so. I don't know if that's a valuable thing, because I can think that can lead to complacency of 100%. I'll change once the world's better or once this changes. Anything outside of you that you are waiting to be more harmonious or loving, or even to stop certain habits, or until the world is this way, or, we see that in geopolitics too. Like when the world is a certain way, and then it just gets more polarized, and then we seem like it is. Maybe it is getting more polarized. Well, it's like, well, what's going to change that? How much can it change? I don't know. But all I can know is that, hey, what do I think the truth is, and how have I come to that conclusion? And I think it's also important to share things that are sometimes uncomfortable as well, which is what I've kind of done through this conversation. I've called out the spiritual community about a bunch, but it's with love, because I want people to see
totally
like that. Hey, just because the spiritual sense we're outside of religion doesn't mean that it's all true. All the channeling to me is as I'm glad that I
wanted to ask you.
Okay, well, great, because my perspective has changed a lot on channeled stuff. And
since you wrote the book?
I mean, I was writing the book and it was changing while I was writing the book. But I decided to throw the Law of One in there. There was a time period where I almost didn't even include the Law of One. And I thought about also removing the Law of One chapter from the book as well. It's not because I don't believe it, but because I was starting to have an aversion towards channeled material, because I saw how much it was used to manipulate other people. And start cult-like followings of certain people or ideologies.
Yeah.
And I think those followings can be New Earth, or it can be Galactic Federation. I think these end up they can be cult-like, just like religions can be cult-like.
Yeah.
And so
well, it's interesting how blindly the spiritual community has just followed channeled
facts.
Messaging,
right?
Like it just not even questioning it. Kind of like, well, I'd be like not spiritual of me to like doubt this. So it's kind of like, can we get curious? Like, I don't know.
We can get curious
really
without saying that it is truth.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and I mean, just take what works, take what doesn't. Like I think Abraham Hicks is a really great example. That a lot of people are positive, right, coming from their workshops and their teachings. But I don't know. Like I get why people are skeptical, and they deserve to be. But anyways, what's your current take?
Yeah. So with channeling, it's like it's tough because I made 25 Law of One videos. I made hundreds of Law of One videos, probably total, and
I still love the Law of One. I think you can still love that and appreciate it for what it is.
Well, it's like not being religious, but you can still learn from the teachings in the Bible and the different religions too, right? So
yeah, what is the value of the Law of One in my life?
Yes.
Does it help me to live a more harmonious life? Even if, this is what I'm thinking now, even if the Law of One was written by a man, even if it wasn't channeled, I would actually prefer for it to not say that it was channeled, honestly, kind of, a little bit. But, my preferences are irrelevant. But even if it is just a guy sat down and said, hey, this is channeled. Maybe they were imagining it. They actually did like lay down on the table. There's pictures and they recorded everything. So they did do this. So if Carla, the channeler, just made everything up. If she did, she is one of the smartest people I have ever
Well, that's where I'm at, because I'm like, how does she know how to speak like this? And by the way, for anyone listening who doesn't know what the Law of One is, it's a channeled series of recordings where it was 3 people involved, right? 2 interviewers and one person who was hypnotized or in a subconscious state being asked questions, and she is answering as Ra. So Ra is a emanation of source.
6 density.
6 social memory complex, right? Coming through her and speaking. And Carla's just a regular person. And the shit that she says is, I can read you some of it.
Well, let's get into the nitty gritty, because I think it's important here. I want this message to get out, because I have seen that people on TikTok, specifically, let's talk about a guy named Museum of Tarot. We'll just call him out directly by name. He made videos that said that she got some like to insinuate during the video that it was a CIA kind of operation to confuse the public. Okay. And to get them to think a certain way. And I'm like, oh, this is around the time I was thinking about taking the Law of One out. I'm like, am I wrong? I could be wrong. I'll take it out if I'm wrong.
Right. You're willing to be wrong. Right.
And I've always been open. Hey, if I'm wrong, that's fine. I would rather let you know that I'm wrong. So I deep dove into his videos, and he's most specific evidence is of this video of Carla and Jim talking about how they got this surgery, but he conveniently left out the part about what the surgery was because it didn't fit his narrative. His narrative was that they got surgery in their tooth that could make them hear what basically like a walkie-talkie tooth is the easiest way to think about it. So somebody could just relate to her. That's what he said that it was. And a bunch of people believe this. I got thousands of people that are telling me, Law of One, it's all BS. And so then I came across Brian Scott, who I knew. I had him on my podcast. He's one of the biggest Law of One creators on YouTube. Much bigger than I am on YouTube by a long shot. And I had him on my podcast, and I went on his podcast. We talked about Law of One. Oh, and we both came to the conclusion of that whole episode is about the Law of One and all of the intricacies of if it is fake. So I dedicated an episode to this topic. But I feel like, oh, crap. Like it could be that. So at the end of that video or that podcast, I sent out a message to people and I said, hey, if you have the original video or you have information about the Law of One being fake or real, send it to me. Sure enough, I got people that sent me the original video because I could not find it of the Law of One. You know, he was trying to say that it was this. If you watch the original video, they explicitly state in the video that they got this thing called psychic surgery. Okay. Psychic surgery is a thing that was happening in around that time. It was like the 1980s-ish, where you would go to certain places, like I think they went to South America, and a psychic would do surgery on you, and they said specifically they were doing it because she had kidney problems. So when they said that they had surgery, it wasn't on a tooth. It was actually in the video referring to had a kidney issue and that a psychic went in and did surgery. So I actually messaged him and said, hey, can you send me the original video? Can you send me more evidence? I want to know if I'm wrong. Never got a single reply. So I'm just saying you can't rely on TikTok creators who aren't giving you accurate interpretations as to say the Law of One is legit or not. Now, there were other things they're talking about. There were connections and I get it that it could or couldn't be. So at this point in my life, I'm not really talking about the Law of One very much, and I probably won't super a lot going forward because I'm into different things, you know, and you just get interested. I'm not really interested because after you do something for a while, I don't know about you guys, but I start to like, what's the next thing? I'm always on to the next thing. And so more it's about the science of and skits and comedy and podcasts. So my final thought on that is, well, if it is, let's say that he's correct. Let's say that there was other evidence that was correct, and it was actually something where she had a walkie-talkie of some kind. What does the Law of One provide in someone's life? Like, what is it actually? What are the principles of the Law of One? Is it something that is telling you to behave a certain way, and if you don't, you'll burn. No, it explicitly states in Law of One, you don't need to know about the Law of One. If you don't know about it, that's fine. You don't need to read this, and many people won't, but they're still giving us concepts like, oh, well, if you're 50% or more in service to others, you move on to the next density. Okay, so I just have to be more loving than I'm not. I think that's a beneficial thing for people to just do. And so also the understanding of there are negative beings that are what people call evil. You could even think of these as demons in a sense. If they're from higher densities, they give us a scientific kind of explanation of what those could be. And so I'm not saying it's ultimate truth. And I actually had this conversation with another prominent creator on the Law of One. If you guys have ever heard of Marco No Polo, he's bigger than I am on TikTok. He's got like 600, 700,000. He talks about Law of One a lot. And I got on the phone because I'm actually going to do an in-person podcast with Marco soon. And dude asked me the same question. He's like, do you think all of Law of One is legit?
Is it all made up?
Is it all legit? Like, what are your thoughts? And I'm like, hey, I think there's elements that could be true, but I'm not really convinced that everything is 100% the truth. Anything, really. And there's nothing to me that is like, this is absolute fact. And we both kind of agreed on the same thing. So I'm not the only one that says this, that it's like, there are aspects of it that, yeah, it is probably beneficial for us, but we don't know if it's 100% facts. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just like what you said about the Bible in your book, right? How this was a lot, a really long game of telephone, and translation, and that there was even mistranslations, and it's been like totally noted, like, yeah, this was totally not translated correctly.
By other translators, they're like, this shit sucks.
But we're just gonna go with
what
it,
the fuck?
right? So
that's crazy.
I think it really, it's crazy.
I forgot to ask if I can swear on this podcast. I'm sorry.
Oh, you totally can.
Okay.
You're fine.
I'm just blows my mind. The Bible does too, in that sense.
It blows my mind, but I still think it has utility.
Yes, it does.
Right?
100%.
Like just like the Law of One. And so that's kind of where I'm at with everything now, where I don't need to verify everything. It's more just like, does it help? Like, does it help? Like, sometimes I used to be so obsessed with knowing like things like, oh, is it better to eat before I work out or like after I work out?
Right.
Like, oh, is it good to drink coffee or bad to drink coffee? And I'd be crazy. I'm like researching like if it actually is better. Yeah, like metabolically, like, is this better or worse? But like, I just decided to like try it with my own body. I'm like, does this help? And you know what? I did stop drinking coffee for like 14 months, and like, it didn't really help. And I started to reincorporate it back a little bit, and I feel completely fine. And I'm like, I guess that answers that. Like, I don't need to go on Google and figure out if this is or isn't true, right? Because everything's going to be different for you. And so, I really like where we've gone with this, which is really like, does it really matter if that is the truth or if that's false? Like, does it serve you in your life?
I think there is value though. And there is value to kind of push back on. There is value in the neuroscience of things. For example, I did find out that, I've been doing a lot of research on coffee myself. And I found out that there's this molecule called adenosine, however you want to pronounce that. And in the morning when you wake up, your body naturally kind of gets rid of adenosine within the first hour to hour and a half. Now, adenosine, what it does is it makes you feel tired. So it kind of starts to go away. But if you drink coffee, it inhibits your body's ability to get rid of that molecule. So it stays in there. And so that's why around 2, 3 p.m. we feel tired, because that adenosine, the caffeine starts to wear off and the adenosine starts to come on, be at the forefront, and that's why we feel tired. So then once I knew that, hey, okay, here's a neuroscience of it, what's happening within within the just science in general, what's happening in my body, because it's not just neuroscience, but just the science of it, it's like, okay, well, that is beneficial for me to know. I think what you're saying of like, hey, it is right or wrong to do it this way, absolutely. But I do think that there is also benefit of like, this is the science of why this is, but we don't need to get lost, because in human design, I'm an indirect light, and you can't explain that scientifically at all, because if you told someone from the science community, I'm going to stay up later because I have more energy. They're like, circadian rhythm. What are you doing? It's like, bro, you know what I'm saying? So not everything is explainable, but I do think that it is nice to know the science behind things. And the more evidence we have of it, the better, which is something that I'm interested in exploring continually.
I love that. I love that. No, and I actually, did you get that from the Huberman Lab? The thing about the adenosine? I remember reading about that as well.
I've been really watching Andrew Huberman. I've been watching a lot of his stuff. I really admire Andrew Huberman and Lex Friedman, both of them. And I think that their ability to relay hard concepts is very interesting. So to anyone who wants to know more about that, Andrew Huberman, Huberman Lab.
Yeah. I mean, they're obviously just very, very passionate about understanding the secrets and workings of the body and the mind. And there's totally a lot to learn there. But my journey right now really is just about using my own body and mind as the experiment. Because sometimes I wonder if I create those situations for myself just by reading so much, like the thing about the 90 minutes, like I was like, okay, but now I'm like worried about that. Am I creating it? You know what I mean? Like before I knew it, like it didn't really matter. Like I would just wake up and do what I do. And I never experienced the crash around 2 to 3 p.m. But then like yesterday I like kind of noticed it and I was like, is that because I had the coffee? You know what I mean? It's like, I'm just
into negative effects.
Yeah. I know. It's like, that's why I feel like sometimes knowing nothing is like the easiest. And honestly, like in ignorance, it's bliss, perspective. Like I can't even choose that if I wanted to, but some people, they just kind of go through life like, I don't know. And like, they're just at peace.
Hey, that's one way to do it. If that's what
it is one way to do
helps
it.
You. I mean, hey, don't placebo yourself into negative things because you're like, oh, it is this way. And that's why I've said a lot in my work that not all bodies are created the same. A lot of people think, well, human bodies, they might look different, might be different height, but generally everything on the inside is the same. But
well, and especially men versus women.
Yeah.
Like coffee affects us differently.
Yeah, for sure.
I
do believe you.
Food affects us differently. Like everything. Working out, literally everything.
I know.
So
my girlfriend
insane.
tells me, that she's basically like 4 different people sometimes.
Yes.
I am 4 different people. For sure. Literally.
Depending on the season, right?
Exactly.
Depending on the season. Exactly.
So, hey, I
God.
get it. I've seen it in my own life. Sometimes I wonder what is going on. Are we still working? Like, is it still good? Are we still good? Like, are we good?
Are we good?
It is just, she always tells me when it comes to like the fall part, like right before the old winter, I'm just like
the old winter.
I'm just like that, and I'm just, she doesn't. The winter season for her is not terrible. So it's more about like the fall. Like it's
the fall.
Very
it's the
kind
fall.
of aloof and so knowing that, I think it's important in relationships because you can understand, it's just this. This is just how it is right now. And you've got to decide in your relationship, is that worth it? But, and how bad? But we also don't want to use excuses to be more this way because of the body, which is what a lot of people will do.
That's so
it can
hard.
be men, it can be women. There's different things like, so I'm not trying to call anyone out. I'm just saying anytime you have like, it is this time during this time of people are susceptible to like being more that way because there's already a reason to be that way. Kind of like what you're saying.
There's permission.
Yeah, that's the word. Exactly. Right.
Oh, that's so hard. I'm with Jessie, right? Your girlfriend. I'm with her. Like I'm just a little different depending on the time of the month. And I wouldn't say like I use that to justify, but it's like, but I'm like, but things are changing like inside of me. Like I'm like, it's kind of like just, I don't know. I'm a being of nature. I'm a lunar being. Like I can't control it, but I don't want to use that as an excuse to be like,
But sometimes it's just the fact of the matter. Like that is what's happening.
Right.
But I do think that of course it is a fine line where some people would use that as more of an excuse or permission to keep going.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't really see that much in relationships. Personally, I see it more in astrology. People using it. That's more when I'm thinking about the thought of like people using permission. Not usually like that from my experience, but I'm not a relationship guru by any means. But more astrology, I see people using this time of the year means this, and I gotta be this, or I'm this because of this. It just ends up being a head trip. I've seen, actually, I'm just gonna come out and say it. I know that, Sam, you study astrology, so hey, I'm not trying to rag on you, but out of all the systems, and I would love for you to fire back at me and hit me with your thoughts. I push back a little here. I've seen astrology be one of the worst systems to use to understand the nature of this reality because it's so distorted in terms of the different types of astrology. It was created so long ago, just like the Bible. So there's sidereal, there's Vedic, there's tropical. And so what the hell is actually going on in terms of like what people are? But to contrast it, astrology can be very helpful when we actually look at the stars and what they're doing at that moment and what that could possibly bring in. So I'm not saying it's all bad, but I've seen it be more beneficial for people to study human design, gene keys, I've seen more success in those. And then also numerology has been something that I've seen because of the math aspect. So what are your thoughts on astrology in general?
So what I love about astrology so much is that it really gives you the permission slip to be fully you, right? Like I think when you really understand the matrix of your chart, the unique matrix that is you, it's not a permission slip to like be all the negative parts of you, but it really helps you understand like why, like in astrology, we talk about like the low and the high road of a sign. So for example, like the high road of Aries is, ambitious, adventurous, leader, bold, courageous. This is my sun sign and moon sign. But the low road is like anger, short-sighted, tempered, controlling, bossy, right? So there's a low and a high road to each of these signs. And so what we're finding, usually what you're looking for in a reading, if you just want to know more about yourself, is kind of like, you're looking for like, why am I the way that I am? Right? Or like, what's kind of on the horizon for me? And then you might learn that, because of these different aspects, for example, like, your sun is square your Mars. That means you're just generally a bit more feisty. But a great way to kind of tame that is by putting your energy into something physical, right? Or being a leader in a group of some sort, organizing things, right? So that's energy that's being misdirected. And so I think it helps people understand the parts of themselves that they've shamed, right? We all have a shadow, parts of us that we don't like. Like, for example, I do tend to get very like bossy and like ill-tempered and angry. And those are things I haven't liked about myself. But when I learned more about the chart, my unique chart and the way that the elements kind of coalesce, I'm like, that's going to be like a trigger for me in general, but this is the best way to direct that so I can take the high road of that sign. And so if I find that for me, like astrology is the full cosmic permission slip to be yourself, not in the tyrant sort of way, but it helps you understand, okay, these are the ways in which I have negatively embodied these signs or aspects, but there are ways for me to positively embody those. So it kind of offers forgiveness to those parts of you that have not shown up in the ways that you've wanted to. And then really it helps you shine and sort of highlight the parts of you that you know to be true, right? Like you've always known that you've got that, like, for Gina, it's like that mothering sort of, loving, nurturing spark within her. And then when she learns, well, it's because she's a Cancer sun with, a Libra rising. She's like, oh, like that makes sense. I don't know. It just offers you a little bit of reassurance. But at the end of the day, I don't think astrology is the framework for understanding the nature of reality, but I think it is a very age-old, like thousands and thousands of years old system of complex pattern recognition. So, and that's really all it is. And so that's why we can see certain stereotypes, not always, right? Because everyone's chart's different, but that's why we see that. But I think that it's just a good way for me to understand myself. It's not about understanding the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's good. You passed the test. I asked you, I saw that you guys were top 1% or whatever you are on Spotify now, followed. You're doing well. And I was like, hey, at one point in this podcast, I have to ask a really blunt question because I don't know if they've ever gotten someone coming at them before. So I got to see, they got to be initiated into the podcast arena and have that debate for a second. And I got to see how they answer a hard question. That was a good answer.
Yeah.
That was a great answer.
I love it because it really helped me just forgive the shadow aspects and see that they aren't bad. They were just they just weren't being directed in the right way. And if you ever go deep into it, Stephen Forrest is a really talented astrologer, and he wrote a book called The Changing Sky. And he talks about free will, actually, within astrology. And the way he describes that is by using transits. So he'll say something like, okay, Mars is going through the third house in the 1960s or something like that. And then he'll pull different, historical figures from that time and how based on their chart they embodied that. And there's someone who took the high road, say like a Martin Luther King, right? And then someone who in the exact same time during that transit took the low road. Right, and became a tyrant, like Hitler, for example. Sure. So it's like this is how he is using astrology to describe it's not like the planet transiting is what's making you do that. It's more like it's activating that energy within you, and it's within your free will to discern whether you're going to take the high road, right, and do like a bold, courageous thing, or are you going to take like violent rage route, right? That energy is going to be expressed some way, somehow as that planet transits. But how you move with that is really up to you. That's his argument on free will.
So have you looked into sidereal astrology?
No, I mainly study esoteric, so I'm interested.
Well, sidereal astrology actually says that the astrology that everyone uses is completely wrong. And there's actually 13 signs. And
oh yes, I've heard that, and I don't like this because it like totally f's up my chart. And I'm like, I don't know.
See, that's my thing with astrology. Just to kind of finish that off, it's hard for me when I look at anything that is not something where we don't have the original source. That's what I liked about Law of One. It's what I like about Gene Key. It's what I like about. I'm not, numerology is a little questionable. We do have a little bit of the sources in numerology. So I'm like on the fence with that too. But I've seen that in human design is also original. But then you also have the faith of like it's channeled, that type of thing because somebody's came up with this. So that's the thing about astrology for me is it's like it was created such a long time ago. There's so many different what it could be. How many signs is there? There's evidence for it being distorted by the church to trick everybody into thinking that there's only 12 and there's 13 and that would mess everybody up and they think they're this, but they're actually this. So I'm not trying to rag on astrology, but I'm just trying to say, hey, we don't know what the origination of it is, but I do think if it is helpful for you to relieve some shadow aspects, just like if someone used Carl Jung's psychological system and there's the persona, and if you see, there's a persona that I have, but there's a self underneath, that could be helpful. And maybe if the more dialed in astrology is helpful to you, then so be it. I mean, I was just kind of kidding when I said it was the worst. So I'm just saying, don't get salty at me because I said that. It was, I had a reason.
It's the worst. It's the worst for you because it's the least helpful.
Right.
Yeah. I'm not saying it's the worst for everyone, but in my experience,
exactly,
I was joking in that sense. So if anybody's salted me because I was talking some shit about astrology, just relax. We're just messing around a little bit here, but I'm still
can't even believe.
That's what I'm saying. Comedy, right? We're learning how to joke and at the same time say some truth for myself.
Yeah.
It's all play. It's all play. But I think what anyone's learning from this conversation really is just, be the judge for yourself. Does it help you? I even think about, this is so simple, but like when I ask people like, oh, where was your favorite place that you traveled to, right? They'll be like, oh, like, Portugal's the best. And I'm like, but what are you basing that on? Is that based on like, the food, like the things that you saw? I can't actually discern if that's going to be the best for me, right? So, take everything with a grain of salt, try for yourself, dabble with all these different modalities and frameworks and just see what works for you. Like astrology for me was just the piece that helped me. Honestly, it sounds so cheesy, but just like love myself more. And not just me, but everyone else in my life. As soon as I started mapping out their charts, I was like, oh, that's okay.
I think astrology also helps you to see all the different colors of you, because I think before I really got into astrology, you kind of feel like you are a million different people, a lot of different personalities. There's all these different versions of you. And astrology kind of helps to map that all out. And I'm like, oh, so that is all me.
Yeah.
So I feel like it helps to kind of, I guess, define certain characteristics and maybe the way that you respond to things. And our astrologer, Ocean, she does such a phenomenal job of explaining it very mathematically. So I would love to get you guys in the same room together. But she always talks about wearing a cosmic raincoat, that it's not necessarily going to predict everything that's going to happen, which is why I was averse to astrology at first, because I didn't want to know, oh, this is going to be a hard season of your life, because then it's like the placebo effect or that self-fulfilling prophecy. But she teaches it in a different way where it's more just so that you can prepare that raincoat or prepare that umbrella just in case, and just to be aware of maybe what is energetically and cosmically going on, so that you're just that one step ahead, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, hey, if it fits, it ships. If it works, it works. I'm not the one to tell you that it doesn't work for you. I say the same when you're talking about looking at charts and stuff. It reminds me of human design. And human design is the same. They say to use your strategy and authority, and you have a deconditioning process of, I think it is 10 years. It's not until 10 years after you study human design that you're actually starting to be deconditioned from society. So that's how long.
Yeah, because everyone's like conditioned to be a generator, right?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Well, I don't know if everyone's conditioned as a generator, but everyone has a level of conditioning by society. I think 70% of society is generators.
Yeah, I'm a generator.
Me too.
Yeah.
Are we all?
And
you're
not
a projector, right?
No, you're a manifest.
No.
I think, are you a manifesting generator?
No, I'm a projector.
Nailed it.
And I think really?
I said projector.
Okay, so the reason I want to know why you said that, because the reason why I haven't resonated with human design is because when I read about projectors, I'm like, I don't know.
That's how I feel.
And then I had actually a human design. It wasn't a reading. It was like a coaching session with other people, and my business coach was in there, and everyone was like asking me to recheck my chart. They were like, "Are you sure you're a projector?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm so sure, because this is the same date and time that my birth chart is based on." But like everyone in the group was like, "I don't feel like you're a projector." So that's why I haven't dived in deeper, because there was no resonance when I was reading about it. But I'm kind of curious to know why you thought that.
Because I saw you post about it one time.
Oh.
I don't have an old grandiose example for you. I just saw it one time on your stories or some shit.
It's like, how did you know, Nick? How did you have that intuition?
Do you want
like,
it? I could have done it. I could have done it. I thought about it. I'm like, I saw it when I saw this thing about you. It's like, nah, bro, I just saw your stories or something.
Oh, I love that. I don't know. I've been wanting to ask you more about it, but you've been studying for how long?
2.5 years.
And you really feel like it's helped you understand just you said your strategy and your authority, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what does this mean?
What do those words mean? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah, like what does that mean? What does that translate into in your daily life?
So you have a strategy for going about life, and you have authority as your authority type. So if you know both, your authority type might be beneficial for you to understand, and then you strategize your life around that authority. Just like if I'm 6'4", I'm going to duck through the door when I go certain doors in certain Airbnbs, like I've had to, because they're too tall. So to know I'm 6'4" and that door is going to hit me, it's like that's beneficial. So I think that might be a shitty example, but that's like kind of how I see it. It's like now that I'm into it and I've used it, I have met so many people. And it's going to sound exactly how you guys probably feel about astrology. But I've done a lot of in-person podcasts now, and just in general podcasts. And that's the best place for me to really like experiment. Because, you meet people and it's like kind of you can tell. But because there's a lot of not self going on in human design. There's this thing called not self, which is basically just people aren't actually what their chart is. And you might not feel like it because you're so out of alignment with what you're supposed to be acting and strategizing as. So that's why a lot of people are like, I know people personally that are not self, and you can see where they're not self, and you can see that actually causes them an issue. Each type has an issue. Like projectors is bitterness, right? Manifesting generator like me, it's frustration, these type of things. And so I've seen that play out in people. And so how it has helped me is just each authority and each type has a specific way that it's supposed to interact with the world. And so as a manifesting generator, I'm going to respond. It's a way that I interact with the world. And every single time that I don't initiate, because manifestors are initiating. And so when a manifestor initiates, that's the way they're like reaching out and they're coming up with ideas on the spot. I'll tell you right now, I've seen it play out in my content so much. I cannot come up with ideas out of nowhere. It's just something that it's not ever been intuitive to me. I would say actually during the night right before bed and right when I wake up, it can happen, but then I'm responding to an idea that I feel like I didn't come up with. To me, there's no me coming up with an idea. There's me responding to ideas that might actually come to me. That's a whole nother conversation about how the field brings you ideas and inventions and things like that. But every time that I initiated and I just wasn't responding, I would have peril. It would just not work out. And every time that I just waited and I felt it in my body, because in human design, I guess we should have talked about this at the beginning, but what makes you your type is the amount of energy centers that you have activated or not, or defined or not, is the exact terminology. So you have 9 energy centers in human design. And so if I'm a manifesting generator, that's going to mean I have an engine, is what it's called. There's certain energy centers that are engines. So I have what's called a sacral defined, which means that it makes me a manifesting generator. So I have the ability to respond. And what that means is, like, if people who might look up the chart after this, if you're a manifesting generator, what that's going to feel like is when somebody asks me something or they say something to me, I can feel it in my body if it's a yes or no. Now, a projector, I actually just had a conversation because my girlfriend is a projector. We just had this conversation again. Occasionally we have to have this conversation because as a generator, I'm susceptible to talking to other people like they are a generator, which is yes or no questions. But she does, as a projector, does not like yes or no questions. It's very dialed in specific of like invitations. I'm going to invite you to do this. And what is your thoughts and guidance on this versus yes or no? So that's what I've seen play out. It works really well in our relationship when I remember to do that, and I do that. And so I've seen in my body a great example. Maybe some people might consider this crude, but I think this is something that you just realize after. People that have done podcasts will understand. Maybe people that haven't had to tell people no won't understand. Maybe they will. I'm not going to judge what people are going to think about this because it's projection. So recently I've been trying to coordinate more in-person podcasts, and I've had people that I've wanted to have out, and I thought I wanted to have out. I would get on the phone with them, talk to them about coming out, and then all of a sudden they might say one thing, and it's just like immediately no. It's just
in
your
your
my
body.
It's just like no. It's just like immediately no.
Immediately
like,
no.
I see what I needed to see. Like I'm referring to that meme if people get that reference. But but it's literally what it feels like. I've seen what it's like. You know, the thing kind of threw me off, just so people don't think I'm like rude or annoying in person. The guy said he wanted to stay with me, and I'm like, I've just met you. You know what I'm saying? And it's just like. I don't like having people I've never met and stay in my house. And so immediately, now, logically, you could come to that conclusion too, of course. Like if someone says it, it might be creepy.
Right.
But it was also in my body a visceral, like, this is done. And I told him, I'm not interested in doing the podcast anymore. It's just a feeling in my body. And it was true. It really was a feeling in my body of like, I can feel when I want to talk to people, when I don't. And it's not like it's something that can remain the same for all times. Like, Sam, we were trying to meet up for a podcast, and then I had 90 things scheduled, and I was like, this is going to happen at some point, but this is just not right now. And then it just didn't end up happening. But I think that it's still going to happen, and there's no like specific like reason besides, you know, there's so much going on with trying to go from Texas to California, hit these podcasts, talk to this people. And it's nothing personal, but I think that's one thing that human design does for me. It allows me to like say, hey, I can't do this right now. This isn't something for me right now because I can feel it in my body. And the more that I do that, because I have pushed against that, I went to New Mexico to do a podcast because Jesse knew some friends. I was not apt on going, and I did not want to go, really. My mind was like, ooh, he's a human design expert. This would be cool. Then they ended up
But you went against
it.
You went against
and
the feeling.
My body was a no, and we went, and the guy ended up breaking up with his girlfriend, and he couldn't even do the podcast. And so I was like, that was like almost evidence for me of like, I knew I didn't. And all of us know that if you're a generator, at least, that you have that feeling of like, I don't know-ness. Now, I think projectors still have that. It's just not maybe a yes or no. It may look different. in the specific nuances of like maybe it's more of a like it feels like there's not an engine turning off or a red light, green light like it is.
I don't have that. I have felt so dumb throughout my life because I can't sense like danger or threat or anything like that. Like I'm kind of like a bit oblivious. I've had to learn that logically. Mm-hmm. I feel like I've been in a lot of dangerous situations without realizing it because I don't have that like, I'm serious. I don't have that like internal alarm system that's like, this is sketchy.
There's actually also, if you are a projector, this is what it is. There's things called aura types in human design. Any generator is actually much more adept to sensing danger because the aura type is actually like a radiation. Projectors have like it's what's called what I call a laser. So you're laser focused on things. So like, of course you can't sense danger because in human design, you're binoculared in on this one thing that you're doing and you can't sense it. But as a generator, I noticed this and we've noticed this at restaurants. We've played around with this. I will be able to like sense what's happening around me. Like like without trying.
Oh my God. My partner's like
without trying. I'm just like, this person's looking at me. This is what's happening. But she can't tell when anyone's looking at her or nothing. She's just dialed because she's a projector. So she's like blinders.
That's me.
So that's something that I've kind of seen. So.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, because I've tried to pay attention more to my surroundings. But like I've so many times like almost walk into traffic. Like that's just like people just think that's like a Sam thing. Like, oh, she's just not paying attention. But like I don't have that sort of surround sound awareness.
Right.
Yeah, the whole human design, because I am a generator too, and the whole responding thing, once I learned that helped me make decisions so much better. And because you can just listen into that inner intuition of like, what does this feel like? Because I have, even with this podcast with Sam and I've said yes to things that feel like a major no. And then like you said, it ends up blowing up in your face and you're like, oh, I knew that all along. So I do like that aspect of human design and also like the initiating because that's the part that confuses me though, because I do feel like I am an initiator, but maybe that's...
Are you a pure generator?
Yes.
Okay. So it depends on like what you mean by initiating. Like give me an example.
I guess thinking of ideas and wanting to start new things. So I'll think of a million ideas, but I do have problems actually starting them.
Okay. What is your what are your
but I'll
lines?
Get the idea.
Like
what does
everybody
that mean?
has lines like my lines are 3-5. I'm a 3 line and a 5th line, which means I'm a experimenter, which means I am always experimenting with new ideas. It's known for the trial and error. Now there are other lines like the 6th line is a roof line, which means you're on the roof for like starting at a certain age, you go on the roof and it's this whole thing. So the lines actually do have to play into it. It's not, human design is I'm just not even gonna say one. It is the most complex thing that exists that I have ever come across. And I've studied an absolute shit ton of things. There is thousands of different interpretations of the lines and there's different nuances to your brain. You actually have 4 parts to your brain and they're either left or right. And so I'm 4 parts right, which means I'm passive brain. And if you're 4 parts left, you're actually active brain. And that also plays into the nuances of it. So, and there's channels. If you want to throw a human design chart up during this podcast, if it's video, right? Then you can see like a chart and you can look at, there's channels that are half linked. And it's like, there's a red line and that most of them are red. And so there's a center, there's a line. That line, if you have a full channel, it's also going to change how you interact with the world. Like I have, for example, certain lines of one Jesse always tells me is I have the money line. And so there's different lines that have different channels. There's I wouldn't say hundreds. There's probably at least 100 different lines. And there's also incarnation crosses, which everybody has a different cross. And the cross has a different thing. Like there's a cross of determination. There's a cross of penetration, which means you're meant to penetrate the masses and give them a message of some sort. So that's why I'm not always nuanced, or that's why I'm not. It's not like all one size. That makes sense.
I just pulled up my chart here. So my incarnation cross is left angle cross of demands. That I don't know what that means. But the profile, is that what you were talking about in terms of the numbers?
Yes.
The 3-5 you said. So I'm a 6-2.
Okay. Got it. So that's also going to play into, and I could absolutely spend all day going into
Oh my
this
gosh,
stuff?
I want to talk to you so bad about this because I've wanted to really delve deeper into it. But like Sam said, it was just like, I guess the initial exposure to it didn't fully resonate. But the more that I do learn about it, I'm like, oh, I guess that is what happened. So,
I mean, I'm just a guy from Michigan. I'm not an expert by any means. So I'm actually, I don't do readings because I'm not good enough to tell you. But if you want to talk to Jesse's,
oh my gosh,
she's studied it for years, and she reads the books and do the things.
We should get Jesse on to talk
we've
about
been wanting
human design.
a human design person on.
Nice.
So,
but your
Oh,
lines are going to play into effect, and also I think you can actually initiate once you respond. And so responding just literally means to me, and people are going to describe this differently. If you have another expert on, they're going to describe it differently. But to me, what it means is, I know when something is happening, I can feel it in my body, and it's a yes or a no, and then I can do things with that. For example, I just got to tell you this random idea that I had last night that felt good. It might sound really weird to some people. It might sound funny to other people. I was about to fall asleep. I let my brain just do its thing when I fall asleep. I never have trouble sleeping because I just kind of let go. So I'm like watching and I'm observing, and this thought comes in to do a skit of like, if Andrew Tate was spiritual, and like to do an improv of like what that could look like, like what the different aspects of what that could be in. And so I knew as soon as I got that idea, I don't know if I'm actually going to do the idea. That's just an example of like, because he's very masculine and do this, do that. If you just were to take that and be like masculine with spirituality, what would it look like? So I thought it'd be funny. I kind of felt like a yes when that happened, but then for generator, you'll get like a no, like when ideas aren't there. So you can still like come up with ideas and have things like that. That's not what I'm saying. That's the nuance of response specifically. I'd say that's what it is. Just listening to how your body feels. And I think that's been explored in many different areas. Spiritual people a lot of times will just say, just listen to your intuition. That might actually just be how you're listening to your body. And my friend Indigo Bruno, he will probably tell you it's more your gut. Listen to your gut, because your gut has its own mind and its own brain. And so your body might know in that way. So again, a million different interpretations of the same phenomenon. Who knows what it is? That's just what I find useful.
What works. Listen to your bod. Yeah, listen to your bod. It's like, it's funny because these are just such obvious pieces of wisdom that we've heard throughout our life, like trust your gut,
follow your heart,
gut instinct. Yeah, follow your heart.
Right.
Like it's and then we just have these systems, or I guess scientific breakdowns, which is kind of what we talked about earlier, used to kind of give language to and lexicon to these experiences. But
you're right. I mean, you could talk about Dr. Joe and his research on the Heart Math Institute, and how when your heart's activated, you feel that energy. You got a field around your body. That's another example of like, follow your heart. Boom.
Yeah.
Yeah, or feel gratitude. It's like we know that works, but like here's the science now. It's like this is what gratitude does to your body,
exactly,
right? And I guess people needed to see that in order to believe it. But he's incredible and bringing so much science to
an inspiration.
Things that all the esoteric wisdom.
Yeah, because the one phrase, demystifying the mystical, I might actually put that in my bio. It's just so good.
Oh, I love that.
That's what he said before, and as soon as I heard that, again, I'm not coming up with the idea, but as soon as I heard it, it's like boom. And that's really what I see my work to kind of be, like demystifying these things that we think are like, are the chakras real? Well, there's actually research to show that there is real, but we don't have to get lost in the research to determine whether something is real. And I think the more people can get that frame of thinking, and they can not just get it but also embody it and try that out, because that feels really good to me, and it allows me to live from this perspective of, because when I feel certain, it's a human design thing. I have an open head. If you want a human design explanation, open heads are usually uncertain. You could explain it and using systems, but in general, I just feel like the more certainty I try to put on things, it's like, is that real certainty? Like people commented on my video on Moon Knight and how, I don't know if you guys saw that maybe what we believe determines where we go in the afterlife. Because that's what Moon Knight, the show, was saying. It's actually not like the same for every person or all humans. Like you go here if you believe it. And so in Moon Knight, he goes to the place where he thinks that he's going to go. And so I had Christians commenting, that's not it. You can expect that at this point online. But I think that there's nothing wrong with thinking that way. It's just as though I think any certainty that we have about the afterlife, if it's like 100% factual, like a lot of people think, it can become culty. And it can become something that will actually cause people more fear than actually freedom. And I think that if we start to look at maybe these systems, like you said, have beauty and value, like love others, treat them as you would yourself, absolute facts. Like we can understand that is helpful. And I mean facts like in the metaphorical sense, not actually facts, but it's actually beneficial to living a harmonious life. It's not all bad. And I was raised Christian, so I'm not saying that it's all bad. But what I am saying is that, hey, like I said in my book, it could be mistranslated. What if the 10 commandments were actually the 10 commitments, And so that's something that came from Conversations with God, the book, and he explored that. That could be, hey, if you commit to God, maybe this is how you'll feel. This is how you'll act. This is what you'll do. And maybe it was completely different. Because if you think about this is really fascinating to me, because how many billions of people base their belief and identify as, I'll say Christian because that's my background, and I think I want to be researched before I talk about other things. If I find evidence in Islam, I will still talk about it, but I don't have the evidence in front of me or off the top of my head because I'm not reading from a script or anything. I just don't have it memorized. So if we look, like I said in my book, we look at the translators that had translated the Bible. There was certain translators that translated into the ones we know today. There's the King James Version. There's the
NIV.
NIV, yes. So a lot of these translations began a long time ago. And one of the first groups to translate it, there was a guy that was known as the translator. He was the guy that you came to if you wanted something translated. And he wasn't included, because he wanted to do a literal translation. Now, a literal translation is like a word for word. There's not a context change based on the opinion of the person. But what we know from the evidence that I've seen is that that's actually not what happened. What actually happened was it was translated contextually instead of contentually, if that's a word. So what that means is that if someone said commandments, let's just use an example. This is not going to be true for the specific example because I don't remember the exact. But there is the thought that, hey, if we look at Hebrew and there are other languages, there's not direct translations for some words. So what word are they going to translate it to? So if there's the word commitments, we've been talking about that. Let's talk about it again. If there's commitments was the original word and there's no English word for commitments, let's just say, again, hypothetically, then you have options. Like if you go type in synonyms for commitments, there's going to be plenty. But you know that if you take commandments and you say suggestions, those are going to be different. Those are going to be very different. And I'm not saying, again, that's the truth for that scenario, but the amount of times that is possible that it happened or did happen in the Bible could completely change the meaning. The whole Council of Nicaea, I mean, I could go into that, how they decided, was Jesus God or was he a man? And it was like the whole Council of Nicaea was based on, is he God or is he a man? They decided he was a God, but there was plenty of Christians before that thought he was just a man. And so what determines that? And they basically outlawed you. They exiled you if you thought he was just a man who became one with God. Or that's it. And then was he God? Did he become one with God? A man that became one with God? Or did he actually become God? Because there's a difference. Or was he God when he came down? Because if he was God when he came down,
like us,
then he would be very different. And nobody could achieve that level. And it would put him on a pedestal and make him this being that nobody else could be like. But it seems as though we find in many different traditions and historical evidence across the world that, hey, he could have been just a man who attained this state, just like the Buddha, just like Krishna, just like these other beings. And that's why I think in the spiritual community we say, hey, maybe he was just a spiritual master. Maybe he was an enlightened being, because there's a difference, because that's attainable by everyone. And I think we see with the church that, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, that was deliberately done so that people didn't believe that they could be like him, even though he says in the Bible, I don't remember the exact verse, but he says, you are not going to be me. You're going to do things greater than me. There's specific verses that he says these type of things. What does that mean? And so if we start to think, well, why did they put him on a pedestal? Was he actually that? Is it consensus, or was it a government that decided that for them? And I'm not saying that the government is necessarily bad in a sense, because I'm not, that's not how I view the world, that all governments inherently are like that. But were there certain reasons why they decided to make it that way? I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know. And I'm not saying that's the truth, but I'm saying that it could be that way. So if we can open up to, hey, what is my experience when I take this perspective? That I need to have a savior in order to save me, and that is something unattainable based on the story. Maybe it is true, there is some truth to it. And, the Buddha and certain enlightened beings also said, this is getting really esoteric now, that they started to say that there are ascended masters in other planes, and you can call on them, and you have your own kind of ascended master that you've chosen as the Godhead. But they're all Godheads. They're all the head of the same mind, which is the same mind that we are, because it all is mental. So, I don't know. Word us out here.
I don't know. Just adding, I don't know though. Adding, I don't know though, after everything. No, but that explanation of Jesus was really, that's where I got to, where I was like, I think it's just been all mistranslated. He was a man who was, reached this enlightened state. That's what we call Christ consciousness, right? And people got confused, basically. Yeah. And then we're like, it's God. And we're like, but then we all are, right?
Yeah, and I didn't mean to discredit everything I said by saying, I don't know. But I think that's just how I am these days. That it's I don't want people to take me so seriously that they get upset that I'm saying, but you can't control what people do. I'm just saying, that's essentially what I'm saying. I guess that's a better way to say, I don't know, is to say, think for yourself. I'm going to start using that. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Nick, holy crap. Thank you so much for just bantering with us, really. And just bringing amazing. Your authentic self. I think if anyone listens to this, they get an idea of Nick is just this playful, seeker.
He's just a guy from Michigan.
He's a guy from Michigan who's playfully seeking and looking for knowledge and spreading it and bringing joy. And Gina, do you want to ask our final question?
Yeah, I will. Before I ask the question, I will say that it's a very approachable way, which I really appreciate. You're talking about extremely complex concepts and, especially getting into religion, and you're talking about a lot of very touchy subjects that some people, like you said, might be offended. But what I like about your approach is that it is very, I don't know. I was going to say user-friendly, but I don't know if that's the right term. But do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's approachable. Our final question, which I think I'm so excited to hear your answer. But, our podcast is called Spiralinghigher, and we seem to see these common themes that each of us go through that we all struggle with, or that we cycle through these lessons. And I think it's really helpful for people to see people like you who also go through these cycles. Because I think sometimes when we heal or learn things, or we, come out of a difficult situation, there's this conception that you're never going to go through it again. Or if you do, that you're going backwards. And so we like to talk about how healing is an upward spiral. So is there a common theme in your life that you have had to spiral through multiple times?
Okay, so I just want to start off with saying I want to dissect the word healing for this, because I think it's important for me.
Yeah,
I'm one that's very intentional about that word, because I think that it's something that can be used when we are, let's say, healing from. Our body is actually healing from something. Mm-hmm. But the perspective that I have about healing in general is that I don't need to heal. If you want to call healing something where you have a perception change, if you want to call that healing, then sure.
Right.
To me, it's like there are certain aspects that I spiral back to, and it's actually not as though I'm trying to escape it. You've never seen me make anything escape the matrix. You've seen me do it exit the matrix, because I think there's a big difference in the wording.
I say the word
trying to
exit.
escape.
Yeah.
And exit. And because exiting implies, well, I'm just going to exit this way of being because it no longer is serving me.
Yeah.
And so when I'm spiraling back to certain things, I'm actually more focused on not that I have this thought or that I have this feeling. It's that what is my response to the thought and feeling being there?
Yeah.
And then when I'm able to get myself, and it actually has to do with my nervous system, a lot of times people will get triggered to the point where their nervous system becomes flighty just because a thought or a feeling is present. So for me, I'm kind of having thoughts of like, for example, to have the humbleness to say during this podcast, I'm like, did I make some cringe jokes? I mean, we have those thoughts come up, and I think, to have the humility to say, hey, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. And I'm spiraling back to like, well, why am I thinking that my jokes are cringe? Or why am I thinking that this isn't good enough? What was wrong with it? What was there something wrong with it? Or are you just developing a skill of learning how to joke on podcasts as a guest more? Because you don't go on as a guest very often. So it's like I'm realizing that what I'm gaining as I continue life is the skills, and I'm not gaining any worth. The worth is not really a thing that is changing. It's really the skills of interacting with the world and with myself in a certain way. So I'll continually come back to like perfectionism.
Yeah.
Did I do this right? I fucked up the Robert Grant podcast audio, and I guilted myself a little bit, or a lot of it, for a minute there, thinking, why didn't I take the extra time to do that? And then I just said, you know what? It is what it is. You can't change it. You cannot change that it happened. And YouTube doesn't allow you to change it either. So all I can do is say, I learned from that. I am not going to spend all the time and the money to go there, to film it in person, and then to rush the editing.
Yeah.
Taking time, making things quality, and deciding it has nothing to do with me as a podcast. It doesn't define me as a podcaster. It doesn't define me as a person that this didn't go right. And actually, ironically, I commented on the video and I pinned it because if you guys have YouTube, you can do that. And I pinned like a comment of myself and I said, I'm so sorry about the audio. And so many people liked it. And they were like, it was great. It's okay. Like people understand. So if you just have that humility yourself, of course, there's going to be people that don't understand. But me as a content creator also understanding that if people are going to judge you like in the negative and insult you, did you really care what they had to say? Because you already know their level of consciousness anyways.
Yeah.
You already know that if they're doing that to people, is that someone you're going to want to be around? Is that someone that whose opinion is actually trying to help you?
Yeah.
So just understanding the human nature of creating things online, kind of spiraling back to like this perfectionism that I think any content creator will struggle with at some point, and realizing you can just really do the best that you can with what you've got. And if you feel like you could have done it better, then just do it better next time. That's all you can do. Don't talk shit about yourself, because the more you become your best friend or how you would want a best friend to treat you, if you literally have that relationship kind of like that, or even if you have a relationship with like your mind is kind of like a pet.
Yeah.
Your mind wants to do things. Your mind wants to tell you that it's going to bark at you, when you're doing things that you don't think that it doesn't want to do, like in the cold plunge, just like my head is screaming at me. That's what it feels like. So I think spiraling back to the part in the podcast where I said doing things that are difficult allows me to generate that resilience. Yeah. And that resilience is also translated into how I see myself.
It's huge. Yeah, if you see yourself as someone who can do hard things, then guess what? You do a lot of hard things.
Yeah, and I think for you guys too, you had to start to see yourself as podcasters. And that we're good podcasters. And once you start to see that, you may not be the greatest at the beginning, but the more that you see that, the more that you start to see things that don't align with that, you're going to stop doing those. Like a good podcast host for me isn't going to rush the edit. They're going to do it right, and they're going to make sure everything is high quality as possible. That's what it means on one end, the technical aspect. Now, conversation aspect's different. I'm sure you guys have had your own things where you're like, oh, I could have said that better, I could have worded that better. So just realizing, hey, I can just continue to develop skills instead of, I don't have to become worthy. I don't have to become a better person.
Ooh.
I just develop in the way that I want to experience life. What do I want to experience? Harmony. Maybe I want to experience love. Continually moving in that direction, not needing the destination to validate me being a certain way in order to feel that beforehand or during the process.
Oh, I love that so much. You don't have to become a better person. You just need to develop more skills.
For whatever you want to do, because I think that what we're actually doing is the world isn't really lacking. I think good people. It's not. I think most people are inherently good, and that's just a perspective that I've seen. And I really see people as lacking skills because skills sometimes are hard to develop, and then they think that because I don't have this skill, I'm not a good person.
Yeah.
Like I will coach people one-on-one specifically, and I'm actually doing a challenge at the beginning of the year that is directly about developing skills on how to post online. Because I think that that's what's missing. I think people can know that they want to do this, but then they think, I'm not worthy. Well, no, it's like, well,
you need the skill.
If you want to play basketball, you just got to practice shooting the ball. I'm still trash at basketball, but I developed skill if I wanted to be. I could be better if I wanted to be. And it doesn't mean that better is in I'm not a good enough it doesn't define me as a character.
Yeah. You don't make it mean something about you.
It just exactly. People start to they like take this personal aspect to doing new things as if it has something to do with them as a person when they're just trying to learn how to do something. And I think especially with content creation, and I know you guys are big into, manifestation, these things, it's like, hey, if we're just going to develop the skill of manifestation, we're just developing the skill of actually not scrolling on social media and listening to a subconscious mind. Maybe it's a meditation at night, and I'm just going to do that. It's hard to do. It doesn't mean that I'm not worthy if I don't do it. It's just like, if I want this, I'm gonna match those two. I'm gonna marry those two in. And I think more, especially with manifestation, because I know, again, that you guys are big on it. The more that I can marry me and that person that I think I want to be in the future into this moment, and it becomes something that I'm actually am.
Yeah.
And then it's easy for me to see, hey, I'm not this because there's this thing that I'm doing. That's not a line. That's not part of this person that I am now. Not that I'm becoming. The word becoming, I think, is one that we get lost in, but it's like, even though it's very difficult to do, and yes, it does take a level of like, you have to let go of the outside world. And Joseph Murphy, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, was huge on this. And so is Neville Goddard.
Neville Goddard. Yeah.
Another one.
Love Neville.
It's just, we didn't even talk about Neville, and I've studied so much of his work. It's brilliant. Brilliant, man. So he was saying the same thing. You have to let go of your outer environment in order to step into who you are. And you're just doing that to another level that people aren't willing to do. And it seems as though things will happen when you do that.
Law of assumption.
So
there it is.
There it is, folks.
Woo!
All about being unconditional.
Yeah, unconditionally acting as
my goodness.
who you want to be. Wow, thank you, Nick. This was like 3 hours.
This is wild.
You are our longest pod to date. So
by far. I'm pretty sure it's double.
I didn't even feel that time. I only know because the recording just conked out for a second, and now my computer's about to die, and I didn't think I was going to need my charger. But
hey, sometimes when you have good conversations, I think it just you start to really get into a rhythm. And I think you'll notice when it naturally comes to an end. I don't know if you guys as hosts have noticed that, but like there'll be like kind of that moment. But I felt like today we just kept going.
It just kept going.
I didn't want that moment to come. I didn't want that moment to come. Yeah. But thank you so much for bringing us your wisdom, your light, your research, and your opinions, right? Because at the end of the day, we're just 3 people from Earth sharing our opinions.
Are we
from Earth?
Depending on who you
Where are we
ask.
from?
Totally.
Regardless of where,
Right,
you're
that's a
from
whole nother
Michigan,
thing,
Gina was originally born in Edmonton. I'm from Tennessee. And now we're all here on the cloud. But it's just been incredible being able to share this information and just exchange energy. Really, it's made me it's put me into a higher vibration. I hope listeners feel the same way, and
Yes.
I hope you keep doing everything that you've been doing because it's been vibrationally effective.
It's like vibrationally nutritious, I feel.
I'm glad we could provide that for you today
Yes.
here on the Spiraling Higher
Yes.
Studio.
Yeah.
The Spiraling Higher podcast. Thank you all for listening. If you aren't subscribed, please subscribe to the Spiraling Higher Studio. Are we on YouTube? I don't even know if we're on YouTube. If we're not on YouTube, we're going to get them on YouTube soon. I will
Yes.
convince them. If you are on a audio platform, follow the podcast, like the podcast, give a nice 5-star review to our friends here because, they've been working hard.
Yes.
They have some amazing episodes. Check out other episodes.
Thank you, Nick.
And I just did that for you. I just did the outro for you. You're welcome.
I love it. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
thanks for having me on. It was great. I think a really beneficial conversation. Anyone listening, and I hope you got some benefit from
We
it.
absolutely did.
Absolutely.
If you want to find me, I'll be nick.zei, Nick Zei, all major platforms. You can check out my book.
Yes,
we talked
10
about.
Secrets of
If you want.
Awakening. We'll make sure to link it in the description. And we'll make sure they get their
Yes.
links to, I think you have a link in even your podcast description where it's like the link to everything. I'll make sure that's in there.
Yeah, Linktree.
So you guys can devour more of Nick's content. But for now, onwards and upwards. Thank you so much for listening to this honest conversation. We hope it brought you peace, clarity, and a little bit further along your spiritual journey.
If you loved this episode, it would mean the world to us if you left us a 5-star rating and a review so we can bring you more conscious conversations, spiritual topics, and guests.
And we lovingly invite you to join our free Spiraling Higher community by clicking the link in the show notes to continue this healing dialogue and share with us how this episode impacted you.
Come on in, introduce yourself, and meet your conscious besties in a safe space for healing conversations between us and other like-minded people on their healing journey.
Here's to Spiraling Higher.